Chapter 585. No one has been able to escape unscathed after provoking this king. In the 10,000 demons palace, countless demons looked up at the corner of the fluttering cape. The vibration from the blood seemed to be able to burst out from the blood vessels. It was so hot that it could almost burn the heart. They looked at each other in the swaying main hall. No one knew what had happened, but they were certain that this burning sensation came from their king. What happened to the king? Why was he so angry? And behind that anger there seemed to be an imperceptible loneliness. The fire Qilin blinked. Why did it feel that the person who was hurt this time was the king? Must have seen wrongly. At this time, after dealing with the last magical beast guarding the light palace, Hellion Vivian dragged that person away and then sat at the entrance of the hall. After pretending for so long, she was already tired. Let's rest first. No matter what, this was Beligaju's bedroom. He had to come back. She should take advantage of this time to fix the crown. In a while she could have a showdown with a certain highness. In the current situation the only way was to have a showdown. She was afraid that a certain highness would not believe her when the time came. Whatever if he didn't believe her. She could still hug his leg and not let him go. Hellion Vivian let out a long sigh and comforted herself. This was a necessary skill for a domineering president to chase after someone. When dealing with a certain highness like this she had to be thick-skinned. In short, she had to bring him back. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and fiddled with the crown. Her little face was unprecedentedly serious. Look, it's the human that the king raised. A little demon passing by saw Hellion Vivian and sniffed. Her smell is so sweet. I really want to take a bite. But it's strange that the king didn't bite her. Another little demon pursed his lips in disdain. That doesn't mean anything. The king has nurtured countless souls, and which one of them didn't leave behind a corpse in the end? It's just that it's not time yet. Hellion Vivian heard the conversation between the two little devils and found it quite interesting. She tilted her head and listened. Her thin lips curled up from time to time. She looked 70% handsome and 30% lazy. Her black eyes shone like stars. The little demon looked over, slightly absent-minded. Demons were born with an irresistible desire for beautiful things. Although the human in front of him wasn't the most refined, he had a mysterious air about him. No wonder the king chose to keep her in captivity. It was indeed strange that he had never bitten her. In the demon world, only partners would be treasured. As for the prey, under normal circumstances, there would be a mark left on it. Thinking of this, the little devil glanced at Hellion Vivian again, but he didn't dare to stay here any longer. It was said that the king was in a very bad mood today. They had to steal the pastries here and leave quickly. Otherwise they would be ordered around by the king. After the two little devils left, Hellion Vivian was the only one left in the light palace. She leaned against the door and didn't know how long had passed. Beligaju walked in from outside. When he saw the little head, his eyes narrowed and his footsteps also stopped. The fire Qilin behind him was originally very tense. Now that it saw Hellion Vivian, it immediately let out a sigh of relief. So the Miss Vivian they had been looking for the whole day was here. Wait a minute. Didn't she escape? Why did she come back? No matter what, it was fine as long as she came back. If they couldn't see her figure again, the entire demon world would collapse. The fire Qilin turned its head and looked at its master's expression. The sudden sound of footsteps made Hellion Wei, who was asleep, open her eyes. She looked up and saw Bailey Jiaju standing in front of her wearing a cloak. The exquisite workmanship of the cloth wrapped around his body, making him look slender and tall. He was also covered with snowflake-like mink fur, which looked like it came from an extremely cold place. The most eye-catching thing was the pair of black suede gloves on his hands. They looked as if they were tailor-made, fitting and exquisite on his fingers, as elegant as his second layer of skin. Hellion Vivian didn't think and directly reached out to hug his long legs. The fire Qilin was speechless. Beligaju didn't understand what she was doing. He lowered his eyes and saw that she had grabbed a mark on his robe. His voice was cold. Let go. No way, she didn't say anything and he was already angry. Hellion Vivian raised the corner of her eyes and insisted on not letting go. Beligaju's face was surrounded by the moonlight, looking noble and elegant. His eyes looked like an amber lake, unfathomable. I'll say it again, let go. Hellion Vivian didn't let go. According to His Highness' character, if he didn't like it he would definitely shake her off. He didn't shake her off, so there was still hope. At this moment, a clear sneer came from not far away. Big sister, look, some people are praising her too much by saying that she is thick-skinned. His Majesty has already told her to let go, yet she is still clinging on to him and not letting go. Hellion Vivian couldn't be more familiar with Xiao Kuei's voice. She turned her head, and the coldness in her eyes made Xiao Kuei, who was talking just a moment ago, shiver. As if aware of the discord between the two, an iPhone glanced at Xiao Kuei. Don't talk nonsense. I'm not talking nonsense. Xiao Kuei felt that her chance had finally come. Usually when she confronted this bitch, the king wasn't around. Now it was obvious that the king hated her to the core. With an iPhone around, she didn't believe that she couldn't kill Hellion Vivian. She's a wild woman from God knows where, clinging on to the king. Xiao Kuei's eyes were full of mockery. She's so shameless in the demon world, so when she's in the human world, wouldn't she be even more open? Maybe she already has a man. Beligaju's eyes turned cold. He didn't say anything but turned around. Hellion Vivian looked at her hand that was shaken off again, and the temperature in her heart instantly dropped. Did he believe Xiao Kuei's words? Xiao Kuei, don't say any more. An iPhone reached out and pulled Xiao Kuei back. She gave her a warning look. This is Miss Vivian's own business. Don't talk too much. Xiao Kuei saw that Beligaju was looking at her, so she didn't listen to An Feng's words. It was harder to distinguish between the truth and lies. Sister An, how can I talk too much? When Hellion Vivian was picked up, her clothes were clearly disheveled. Maybe she was thrown there after having sex with the disciple of the exorcist temple. You know a lot. This sentence was said by Beligaju. He smiled, and that kind of gentle arc could almost make the world lose its color. Chapter 586. Xiao Kuei's face turned red in an instant. She said shyly, I'm also worried that the king will be deceived by this two-faced woman. Hearing this, Bailey Jiaju strolled towards her. His posture was so graceful that it could only appear in a comic book. Large clusters of black feathers fluttered down from his body. There was no longer a cynical smile on his face. His handsome and cold face was faintly discernible and bewitching. Xiao Kuei's face turned redder and redder. Her heart was beating non-stop. However, at this point Bailey Jiaju seemed to have thought of something and paced back again. Hellion Weiwei was still immersed in her own little disappointment and appeared a little listless. When she saw him walking back, she puzzledly raised her eyebrows. No one would have thought that Beligaju would bend down and cover her eyes with his hands. He said in a low and pleasant voice, Close your eyes. Close my eyes. Why? Are you going to do something wrong to me? This was Hellion Vivian's first reaction. After all, she felt that a certain highness' current behavior did not seem like he had forgiven her. Beligaju did not forgive her, but, if you see me kill someone, I will be very troubled. So you better close your eyes. Who are you going to kill? Me. Hellion Vivian felt like she was being hypnotized. The man's voice was like sand slowly flowing through her ears, with indescribable enchantment. Beligaju did not deny it. He only glanced at the crown in her hand, then, are you going to close your eyes or not? Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. I don't look good when I die. You better think about it again. Beligaju looked at her and said indifferently, It will be done soon. Don't open your eyes. The surroundings fell into darkness. Hellion Vivian did not nod or shake her head. Xiao Kuei, on the other hand, had a look of schadenfreude on her face. This bitch was finally going to die. What could be more delightful than this? However, what she did not expect was that the man's target was her. She didn't even have time to see his movements clearly before she heard the sound of her collarbone being crushed. Then came the pain of her tongue being cut open. That kind of bone-piercing pain made her scream with all her might. However, the man did not stop because of this. Instead, he curled his thin lips and shattered her left leg bit by bit. An iPhone, who was standing close by, was so shocked by this scene that she was speechless. Xiao Kuei's blood splattered on her face. She was afraid that she would never forget this scene for the rest of her life. She watched as the people she was familiar with slowly turned into a bloody mess in front of her. Only then did she realize how terrifying the man in front of her was. It was so terrifying that she felt an unprecedented chill from the bottom of her heart. He was indeed a devil. A real and scrupulous devil. Hellion Vivian, who had her eyes closed, did not know what had happened. That was because the action of closing her eyes in Beligaju just now was not that simple. That was the demon's hint. Once it was given, it would cause a person to temporarily lose their 5 senses. Of course, except for their sight. Hellion Vivian's hearing was also affected to a certain extent. Just as she was wondering why she couldn't even sneak a peek, Lin Mingya said, "You're right." On the other side, Bailey Jiaju had paralyzed Xiao Kuei, but he did not let her die. He just casually ordered the person beside him, "Send her to the 5th prison, those magical beasts should be hungry by now." Yes. Fire Qilin glanced at the clueless Hellion Vivian. Sure enough, the king treated Miss Hellion Vivian differently. This was the first time that the king cared about who saw it when he attacked. It looked at Miss Anai, who was standing on the other side. She could not stand it anymore and started to vomit. Sigh, how pitiful. After all, those who had witnessed the entire process of the king's killing could not eat a single bite of meat for a month. Even Fire Qilin had to admit that the king's killing method was too cruel. Ugh ugh. Xiao Kuei, who was being dragged forward, moved her mouth toward Ni Feng with all her might. He could not say anything now. She was in so much pain that she broke out in cold sweat. She just wanted Ni Feng to save her life. Ni Feng wanted to save her too. Her face was so pale that it was almost drained of blood. King, Miss Anai, the king usually does not change his decision under normal circumstances. Fire Qilin turned sideways and blocked Beligaju's back. Seeing that its master did not say anything, it was even more sure that it did the right thing. It straightened its back and said, "You should go back to your room and rest. After all, you are still injured." Fire Qilin's words cut off Xiao Kuei's thoughts. In the end, she still did not understand why she would die. However, that did not mean that Ni Feng did not understand. That person treated Hellion Vivian very differently. Ni Feng's fingers stiffened. She looked at Fire Qilin in front of her and forced herself to speak. "Xiao Kuei is my sister after all. I can't change the king's decision, but I must leave her body intact." "Of course. After all, you saved the king. We will leave her body intact." Fire Qilin turned around and looked at its master. It was obvious that the king's mind was no longer on this matter. Ni Feng knew that this was the best ending. However, she did not expect the situation to develop like this. She subconsciously clenched her fists and calmed down. If it was just based on the plan, the effect would be better if Beligaju cared more about Hellion Vivian. No matter how different it was, once the seed of suspicion was planted, it would not be so easy to remove it. "Clean this place up." After saying this, Bailey Jiaju wanted to bypass Hellion Weiwei and walk into the bedroom. He really didn't want to talk to her anymore. If it was not for the fact that she still had her eyes closed, he would have asked, "Are you done? Can I open my eyes now? Actually, I think you look very handsome when you kill people. Why don't you let me see?" "If you say so." Beligaju did not think that she was like a little canine that followed behind him and hugged his leg when he was not paying attention. "Are you done?" Hellion Vivian opened her eyes. They were clear and lazy. "Your hands, there is a strong smell of blood. Did he just kill someone?" To be honest, she thought that the person he wanted to kill was her. Because even now she could still feel the strong displeasure from him. Beligaju ignored her. Hellion Vivian thought for a while, then raised the crown in her hand. "I fixed it. Do you think this king will want an old thing?" Beligaju's voice was very cold. Hellion Vivian froze. She felt that the crown in her hand was thousands of kilograms heavy. It was so heavy that she could not breathe. "What do you mean by old thing? Do you believe what Xiao Kuei said just now?" Beligaju did not say anything, he just walked past her. Hellion Vivian took a deep breath. "I do have a man in the human world, but that man is not anyone else. It is you." Chapter 587. Hellion Vivian, do you think that I have a negative IQ? Beligaju glanced back at her. The mockery in his eyes made Hellion Vivian's heart clench. However, she still stood up and continued with clear eyes. "I know this is a bit ridiculous, but it's just your past now, and the current you is just a fragment of your soul." "What do you mean?" There seemed to be some ripples in Bailey Jiaju's eyes. Hellion Vivian knew that he was willing to listen to her, so she explained clearly how she came here, what the Fire Qilin did, and why he was sealed by the divine exorcism seal. "That's why I told you to be careful of Ni Feng. Love rivals and whatnot, they must be eliminated from the beginning." However, after listening to her, he didn't seem to have any reaction at all. "You don't believe me?" Hellion Vivian raised her left hand, trying to make herself look more convincing. I still have the red soul sealing rope that the fire Qilin gave me before I came here. It said that as long as I cut this rope I can go back. But I won't cut it unless you come with me. Beligaju smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Hellion Vivian, you know so many things, but why don't you know that if you want to use the divine exorcism seal to trap me, I have to go to the human world first? What? In an instant, Hellion Vivian felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave, as if someone had splashed a basin of cold water on her. From top to bottom, there was no place that wasn't cold. No one had ever told her this, and perhaps even the fire Qilin didn't know this. But from the beginning she kept asking Beligaju to follow her back to the human world. How could he believe her with such a motive? Just kill me. Hellion Vivian had already started to give up on herself. At this moment Beligaju suddenly grabbed her hand. Was what you said just now true? Which one? Hellion Vivian subconsciously asked. Beligaju looked at her coldly. Your man in the human world is me. Of course it's true, we're already married and you promised that you'll only love me in this life and never leave me. Alright, the last sentence was added by Hellion Wei herself. She was thinking that since he didn't believe her anymore she might as well go for broke. Beligaju looked at her deeply for a long time, so long that Hellion Vivian felt that her face was about to be seen through. He then slowly opened his mouth and said, I don't seem like the kind of person who would say such things. You know that you'll never be gentle in this life. Hellion Vivian whispered. Bailey Jiaju's long and narrow eyes slowly narrowed. What did you say? I said what I said just now, I said. Hellion Vivian smoothed things over at the right time. Beligaju's tone was finally not cold. This does sound like something you would say. Then you believe me? Hellion Vivian felt that it was a bit inconceivable. Based on the current situation she didn't believe herself. When did a certain highness become so pure? Beligaju looked at her and suddenly laughed, trapping her in the middle of the wall. Because this king found that if this king doesn't believe you, you'll keep hugging this king's leg. Other than this method, what else do you know? I know a lot of things. Hellion Wei was very knowledgeable when it came to this. She did not study the 108 ways to woo a wife for nothing. However, she continued, you can't possibly believe me just because I hugged your thigh for a while, right? I still plan to do something else. Beligaju's eyes darkened. What else do you want to do? Kiss you. Hellion Vivian's voice was languid, and there was a smile at the corner of her mouth. You don't know, but you used to criticize my method of chasing people. You said that it was better to just give them directly than anything else. A familiar coolness spread over, and Hellion Vivian's following words were buried in this kiss. When it ended, as if he was reluctant to leave, the tip of Beligaju's tongue lightly licked the seam of her lips, and he said in his usual cold tone, like this? Hellion Vivian's ears turned red and she resisted the numbness and cleared her throat. Why do you believe me? Because you clearly ran away but you came back and you're hugging a crown like an idiot and sleeping here. Beligaju reached out and hugged her. The empty space just now was finally filled. Hellion Vivian. Why does a certain highness have to attack me every time he praises me? Also, I'm the only one who knows about the soul fragments and I've never told anyone about it. Beligaju stroked the red string on her wrist. Including this soul-sealing rope, it was originally mine. This time it was Hellion Vivian's turn to be puzzled. How did you know in advance that you would have a soul fragment? I didn't know in advance, but from the moment I fell from the sky, my soul could be controlled, combined, or disintegrated by me. Beligaju said casually, it seems that the divine exorcism seal you're talking about is indeed very powerful. Otherwise I wouldn't have to disintegrate my soul. Hellion Vivian finally found an opportunity. The main thing is that you were betrayed. The divine seal is secondary. At this time she had to remind him of the existence of her love rival. Beligaju obviously saw through her little thoughts, and his thin lips curved into a beautiful smile. I'll go to the human world with you. No, they're probably waiting for the moment you go to the human world to activate the divine exorcism seal. You can't go. If it was in the past, Hellion Vivian would probably be very happy to hear this, but if she let him go to the human world now, it would be equivalent to letting him experience the pain of the past again. Bailey Jiaju looked at her with his deep eyes. His fingers slid across her face, feeling the warmth of her skin. How could I fall in love with such a stupid person like you? Am I stupid? Wait, didn't you just say that you like me? Hellion Vivian's eyes lit up. At that moment Baligaju really felt that he was raising a canine animal, the kind that wouldn't break no matter how hard he fell. There had never been anyone who could make him feel so confused and unable to push her away. Because she didn't seem to know what fatigue was, she was like the sun in the human world. But later he realized that it wasn't that she didn't feel tired. Otherwise she wouldn't have been so tired that she fell asleep at the door. Baligaju reached out and carried her, then put her into his blood coffin. The blood coffin seemed to have a hypnotic effect and it was filled with his scent. Hellion Vivian felt her eyelids grow heavy, and she could faintly hear his low voice. The only way I can go back is to let things continue as they were. Otherwise, there won't be the me you know. As soon as he finished speaking, the man in front of her transformed into a cloud of fog, and entered the human world with the fire Qilin. Then an overwhelming Buddhist light seeped into the demon world, and the divine exorcism seal began to descend. Hellion Vivian, who was sleeping in the blood coffin, held the crown in her hand, and when she woke up again, it was already in another world. Chapter 588. The surrounding air was very cold, lingering in the winter. It was a vast expanse of white, and she could even see the breath that came out of her mouth. Hellion Vivian stood in the middle, and for a moment she was confused. This was the palace? Heavy snow filled the air. As the north wind blew, the snow and dust were like blooming dandelions, drifting away and landing on the white stone steps. Not far away one could even see palace maids and eunuchs walking back and forth. This was indeed the palace. But the most important thing was, why was she in the palace? Did she go back? No, that was impossible. According to Fire Qilin, after collecting a soul fragment, one would enter the location of the next soul fragment. Hellion Vivian looked down at the crown in her hand and clenched her 10 fingers. She seemed to be able to see that person's last appearance when he turned around. Let things continue the way they were supposed to? How could Hellion Vivian not understand the meaning of this sentence? It was because she understood too well that her heart ached a little. She moved her fingers and suppressed her emotions. When she looked up again, she had regained her usual clarity. Since this was the location of the second soul fragment, then Baligaju shouldn't be far from here, right? But which palace in the palace was this? Why was it so quiet? She had been to the cold palace before and it wasn't like this. But other than the cold palace, which other palace had so few palace maids? Hellion Vivian took a step forward. She didn't know which door she pushed open, but the dazzling sunlight suddenly hit her face. Hellion Vivian instinctively raised her hand to block her eyes. She looked to her left, facing the direction of the light source. Because she had just opened her eyes, they were still a little uncomfortable. He could only see an arrogant figure standing under the golden light. The figure was very small. Hellion Vivian thought it was little Seven. But when the figure came closer, she realized that it wasn't little Seven. The figure was wearing a black brocade robe with a large cloak outside. If this kind of cloak was worn by other children, it would definitely look out of place. But on this boy it complemented each other so well. His handsome features were like the night sky that was propping up the sky. He was neither cold nor indifferent, and there was not the slightest expression on his face. All he had was coldness and the power to command the world. Ice-cold blood flowed out from between the gaps of the boy's fingers, but it was as if he didn't feel it. His face was expressionless as he walked forward. Until he saw Hellion Wei, that pair of eyes that didn't have any ripples suddenly turned cold. Hellion Vivian also felt this hostility, but what shocked her wasn't this. It was that boy. He was clearly a miniature version of His Highness. Hellion Vivian was stunned. The scene she was seeing now was somewhat familiar. When she was trapped in the formation, an iPhone tried to help her understand the Baligaju of the past. Now not only on his hands but also on his back, there were needle marks left by his mother. Different from what she saw in her dreams, the boy in front of her was too real. He was so real that Hellion Vivian could feel the coldness in his eyes even if she didn't get close to him. In other words, the soul fragment this time was His Highness when he was young? Hellion Vivian was a little confused. After the boy glanced at her, he didn't give her a second look. His left hand pressed on his right arm and he walked into another palace door. Hellion Vivian followed him in without thinking. This palace was indeed more deserted than the other palaces. This should be the palace before the fire. No wonder she felt unfamiliar. Bang. The wooden bucket sank into the ancient well. Little Baligaju was holding the wooden rope with one hand, trying to pull up the bucket of water. But his left hand was too painful and he wasn't used to using it like before. He originally wanted to just let it go. Unexpectedly, a pair of fair and slender hands suddenly appeared in front of him, and with a strong lift, the wooden barrel in his hand was taken away. Bailey Jiaju turned his head and saw a face with a faint smile. He had just seen this face. It was a woman who appeared out of nowhere. This highness has never thought of exposing you, and you don't need to curry favor with this highness. Baligaju pushed her away, his voice so indifferent that it was almost emotionless. Hellion Vivian originally thought that a certain highness who had become smaller would be easier to deal with. She didn't expect that Baligaju, who had experienced the most complicated side of being capricious, would be the most difficult to deal with. Wasn't his action of drinking and sleeping a little too aristocratic? He was still pretending to play the flute. How old was he? About 7 or 8 years old. Why did he make it look like he was in a blockbuster? Needless to say, those eyelashes were really long and thick, as black as ink. Hellion Vivian reached out and wanted to touch them. She was from the Appearance Association and she really couldn't resist this fatal temptation. Probably because he didn't expect Hellion Vivian to do this, the boy was stunned. His cat-like eyes narrowed dangerously. Do you not want your hand anymore? Why are you so cold since you were young? Hellion Vivian decided to educate her husband while he was still young, so that it would be troublesome for her to chase after him in the future. You're so cold you won't be able to make friends. Is that so? The little boy's expression was quite arrogant and evil, and a chill appeared in his eyes. Hellion Vivian felt that this child's gaze was too strange. She reached out and touched his lotus-like little hand. What are you thinking about? Why are you smiling so creepily? I'm thinking about how to kill you. The little boy was expressionless as he spoke coldly. Hellion Vivian paused for a moment, then pulled him over and hugged him. She did her best to ravage him. You don't have to be so rough. You have to be gentlemanly to ladies. No, you don't have to be gentlemanly to all ladies. You have to remember my face. You only have to be gentlemanly to me and you don't have to be like that to anyone else. You have to remember my face because in the future, you will fall in love with me until you can't extricate yourself, understand? The little boy seemed to be angered by her and his face darkened. Was this woman not afraid of death? She was really long-winded. He had never seen anyone more long-winded than her. Seeing that this hug is so warm, I won't throw you over the wall. The little boy thought fiercely in his heart, but when he heard the woman's last sentence, he couldn't help but mock her. Me? Fall in love with you until I can't extricate myself? Woman, have you not woken up yet? It's good that you're daydreaming. Why don't you take a look at how old you are? I don't like old people like you. Hellion Wei. This is not cute at all. Could it be that he was born with this poisonous tongue? Would it kill him to comfort her? She was only 17 years old. How was she old? Chapter 589. Alright, the age gap between them was indeed a little big. However, don't you think that older sister is more interesting? Hellion Vivian asked very seriously. The little boy smiled coldly. He looked at Hellion Vivian as if he was looking at a maid. He said slowly, older sister? Auntie is more like it. I must teach you a good lesson today. Hellion Vivian really felt that the miniature version of His Highness was really asking for a beating. That arrogant look really made people want to hang and beat him up. The little boy crossed his arms and leaned against the door frame. His posture was elegant. A classic example of being angry out of humiliation. Hellion Vivian took a deep breath and told herself not to argue with him. He was still young. Moreover, your breasts are not worth looking at all. The little boy's beautiful lips twitched. His indifferent voice sounded as if he was narrating a fact. Will any man like you? Hellion Vivian felt that the little bit of rationality left in her had been burned away. He was still young. Young my ass. He even knew how to look at breasts. You come here. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. The little boy did not move. He stood in the same spot and looked at her coldly. Hellion Vivian did not say much. She was just joking to lower his guard. Now that he was much less vigilant, she would not be beaten to death if she attacked him. Woman, what are you doing? This was the first time a woman dared to lift his robe in public. The boy's voice was very deep. It was so deep that one could not tell whether he was happy or angry, but it made one's scalp tingle. At that moment, Hellion Vivian thought that she was facing the adult Baligaju. However, that small face was there. Hellion Vivian was much bolder. Her fingers crushed the ointment and slid it across his back where the wound was. The little boy froze and turned to look at her. His long and narrow eyes slowly narrowed. Crack. After the last piece of firewood in the furnace was burned, this empty palace was already cold enough. Who would have thought that there was a little boy sitting opposite her who could make the surrounding temperature even lower? Hellion Vivian threw other things into the stove, trying to make the fire burn brighter. She said to the little boy, "Is it warmer now?" The little boy didn't say anything. That cold look in his eyes was as if she owed him a lot of money. Hellion Wei felt that she had to explain, "I've observed, there were only the two of us in the courtyard just now. Don't worry, what you're worried about won't happen at all. Other than me, no one else saw your bare back." The little boy still didn't say anything and just looked at her coldly. Hellion Vivian really couldn't bear such a gloomy gaze. "Wasn't I in a hurry to apply medicine for you just now?" The little boy smirked and said in a cold tone, "You're in such a hurry to apply medicine that you've taken off my robe. How can I apply medicine if I don't take it off?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "Don't you know how to give the ointment to me and let me apply it myself?" The little boy brushed his robe and sat back on his exclusive wooden chair. He crossed one leg over the other, put his elbow on the wooden table and supported his chin with his index finger. He looked at her elegantly and lazily. Hellion Vivian, what kind of gaze was that? It was like he was mocking her intelligence. After she became an adult, it was fine if he called her stupid. But now he was only 8 years old and he was already mocking others? This was too arrogant, too presumptuous, and too condescending. Also, why would a child like him wear black gloves? This kind of obsession with cleanliness was indeed cultivated from a young age. "Woman." The little boy put down the teacup in his hand and slowly adjusted his black gloves. That pair of enchanting eyes was as cold as ice. "Are you going to tell me yourself, or do you want me to send you to the Imperial Household Department and let them ask you where you came from and why you came to the Imperial Palace? Why did you try so hard to get close to me?" His Highness was indeed not easy to fool. Whether it was him who had grown up or him who had been a child, they were all very smart. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes. Based on her experience in the demon world last time, she told Beligaju everything without leaving out a single word. Firstly, it was because this person thought too much. Even the slightest clue could make him suspicious. It was better for her to tell him everything. It was better than being suspicious in the future. Secondly, if he heard these things, he might go back with her. Reality proved that the second possibility was completely impossible. Because the little boy's face was so calm that she felt like she had said a bunch of nonsense. She couldn't help but feel a little depressed. "There are some things that you said that are worth believing," the little boy said casually. "Really?" Hellion Vivian instantly became spirited again. She grabbed the little boy's hand and shook it back and forth. "You still have some redeeming qualities, child." The little boy's mouth curved up. His voice was very pleasant to hear. "For example, when I grow up, I will laugh at you for being stupid. It's very normal because you are very stupid to begin with." "Hellion Vivian, did you just say that when I grow up, I will lock you up?" The little boy tapped his fingers on the wooden table as if he was deep in thought. Wei creased her long, shapely eyebrows and shrewdly asked, "I've said so much, why are you only interested in this matter?" The little boy said calmly, "I see that you don't like it, so I will avoid locking you up in the future." Compared to locks, he preferred that kind of chain. He didn't know if this woman was telling the truth, but he really wanted to put her in his prey pool. It was quite interesting to watch her stretch out her claws. "Brat." Hellion Vivian stretched out her arms and hugged him. "You can have this kind of awareness, it proves that you are very good." "Very good." "Brat." "Heh." The little boy raised his beautiful eyebrows. "Good, very good. It seems that this kind of prey should be locked up with iron chains or something." "That's the expression." Hellion Vivian seemed to have discovered something. She pinched the little boy's overly handsome face back and forth. "You are a man. If you have something to say, just say it directly. You're always like this. It looks like someone is going to be unlucky." "You also know that someone is going to be unlucky?" The little boy curled the corners of his mouth, and a trace of blackness flashed in his eyes. But the two of them didn't continue talking because a woman dressed as a palace maid was walking towards them outside the door. She was carrying a food box in her hand. She should be here to deliver food to Beligajuk. But her attitude was not good. Even her greeting was in a strange tone. "Your Highness, it's time for lunch." Why haven't you washed your hands? If the Empress knows about this, she will not be happy. Chapter 590. Hearing this, Hellion Vivian glanced at the palace maid who spoke. She thought that this person was really tired of living. She actually dared to speak to His Highness in such a tone. Was she not afraid of angering His Highness? At this time, Hellion Vivian had long forgotten that the person standing in front of her had not yet become the #1 person in the world who could kill with one look. He was still a child and an unfavored prince at that. Bailey Jiaju knew very well what an unfavored prince should do in the imperial palace. He silently looked at the food box that appeared in front of him, then walked to the front of the wooden basin without saying a word. When he was washing his face, there was no trace of expression in his eyes. Hellion Vivian looked at his small figure and only felt a lump in her throat. She had never seen His Highness like this. That person had always been aloof and never put anyone or anything in his eyes. Even the Emperor could not do anything to him. But now, even a palace maid could mock and ridicule him. Hellion Vivian did not like this to begin with. However, that palace maid did not know how to restrain herself. She glanced at Baligaju and muttered in dissatisfaction, "Really, why am I so unlucky to be arranged to deliver food here? You think that serving the royal family is your bad luck?" Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. The corners of her mouth were slightly curved and it was very beautiful. Bailey Jiaju, who was washing his face, paused his movements, lifted his pair of beautiful and long eyes, and looked toward Wei Wei who was speaking. A trace of light flashed through the depths of his eyes. The palace maid raised her eyebrows and sneered, "Looking at your appearance, you just entered the palace, right?" "That's right, that's what I think." "What? You still want to make trouble for me? Do you know who I am? You don't know the rules at all. I'm warning you, don't meddle in other people's business. If you anger me, I have plenty of ways to deal with you." "Little girl." "Little girl?" Hellion Vivian licked her thin lips. How long had it been since she heard someone call her that? How should she put it? She really wanted to beat someone up. The palace maid looked at her with disdain. She didn't put these two people in her eyes at all. One was a prince who wouldn't resist no matter how they bullied him, and the other was a new palace maid who just came in. What could they do to her? "You're not convinced?" "That's right, I'm not convinced," Hellion Vivian said with a chuckle. She stepped forward and kicked the palace maid. Hellion Vivian was very skilled in fighting. She didn't use martial chi. With just one kick, the palace maid didn't come to her senses for a long time. With his head buzzing, he looked up at Hellion Vivian. You dare to hit me? Isn't it natural for me to hit you?" Hellion Wei Wei crouched down and patted her. "You're just a palace maid, yet you dare to treat His Highness like this. Beating you is already a light punishment. If I drag you down and behead you, you deserve it." The palace maid stared at Hellion Vivian. Her face was extremely embarrassed, but she knew that Hellion Vivian was not to be trifled with. In the past, it was the third prince who complained a little, but he never said anything to the retired emperor. How many days had it been? Almost 10 days? That child didn't even dare to fart. Why didn't she bully him? If he didn't make the Empress unhappy, she wouldn't have to come here to deliver food. Gradually, her courage grew and she had forgotten about Bailey Jiaju's identity. Now that she was reminded by this new little girl, she couldn't help but feel guilty. She endured the pain and stood up. She didn't say anything more. She glared at Hellion Vivian and ran out of the palace. However, there was more resentment in her back that couldn't be ignored. Hellion Vivian didn't put this palace maid in her eyes. Since she hit her, she wasn't afraid of the Empress behind her. It would be best if that woman came to find her. She would teach her a lesson. Look at how cute His Highness was now. Although he was a little sharp-tongued, at least he was more normal. He wouldn't kidnap people casually. That Empress actually did it. She was simply crazy. Maybe in the future, His Highness wouldn't be able to distinguish between people and prey because of the Empress. After being abused from a young age, even the most outstanding child would grow up crooked. And the person who abused him was his Empress mother. When Hellion Vivian thought of this, she glanced at the little boy not far away. He was standing there quietly. His black hair fell down and covered his face, making it impossible for people to see his expression. Hellion Vivian inexplicably felt a tug in her heart. She walked over and hugged him. "Little brat, don't worry. In the future with me no one can bully you." After saying that, she added, "Not even your Empress mother." Beligaju was still thinking that the palace maid couldn't stay. If she stayed, she might expose this stupid woman. When Hellion Vivian hugged him like this, in an instant his mind went blank. The little boy helplessly reached out to support his forehead. It seemed that he could only wait until it was quiet at night. He had to replan his method. Although this woman looked stupid, she was actually very smart. Just take the palace maid as an example. She knew what the other party was most afraid of. The stiff kick and the understatement of the threat were enough to make the other party feel a sense of oppression. However, when doing things in the imperial palace, they had to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. Beligaju's eyes darkened, but he didn't want her to find out that he was killing people, so this time there couldn't be blood. He couldn't use a knife, which made it more difficult for him to kill people. If someone found out, he, as a prince, would be completely excluded. Because he knew better than anyone, no one would accept a prince with a vicious behavior as the heir. In the past, when he encountered this kind of problem, he would usually spend a long time to solve it. Every step had to be calculated accurately in order to avoid any accidents. This time it was indeed a little rushed, but as long as he put in more effort, everything wouldn't be a problem. In fact, he wasn't a person who liked to put in effort. But for his prey he could only take a little risk. Beligaju looked at the face in front of him that was full of worry for him. His hands really itched. He wanted to tie her up and tie her up tighter and tighter. What are you thinking about? Hellion Vivian was strange. Why couldn't she see through a child's mind? When he grew up, she couldn't see through him. He was only 8 years old now. Why did she still feel that there was a story in his eyes? Was it because of her nerves? Hellion Vivian reached out and grabbed her hair. The little boy saved his body from her arms and said in a cold voice, "This Highness is thinking about what this Highness will eat in the future if you beat her away. You don't have to worry about this." Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips into a smile. "When I came in just now, I found a lot of fish in the river outside. Let's roast fish tonight." Chapter 591. The little boy frowned. Grilled fish. Only loved you brand grilled fish. Hellion Vivian looked at him with a smile. "What do you think? This name is not bad, right?" The little boy looked at her and said slowly, "It's such an ordinary name. What are you so happy about?" "How is it ordinary?" Hellion Vivian widened her eyes. "That's your name and my name." The little boy raised his eyebrows. "Your name?" "Vivian." Hellion Vivian seemed to have thought of something and said, "Oh right, you must remember my face and my name. When you choose a concubine, choose carefully. Don't choose some Hellion Jiaoer. That way I will have to deal with my love rivals." On one side, Hellion Wei Wei was still fighting for her own benefits. On the other side, the little boy's thin face was already feeling a little hot. "Only loved you. I loved you. This woman is really... I've never seen anyone more talkative than her." The little boy turned around and poked the food box with his finger. When Hellion Vivian saw his actions, she took the opportunity to look at the food in the box. It would have been better if she didn't look, but once she did, her whole body turned cold. "It's winter and that palace maid let you eat this?" Cold rice, stir-fried cabbage and meat, but the meat was so fat that it made people lose their appetite. She doesn't have the guts to do that." The little boy smiled. Hellion Vivian didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that there was something wrong with that smile. The little boy was a little absent-minded. He picked up the food box and fed it to the sparrows outside. Hellion Vivian felt that her eyes were playing tricks on her. After all, His Highness was like an automatic refrigerator after he became an adult. Wherever he went, he would freeze. He was aloof and otherworldly. Not to mention feeding small animals, he would have to wash his hands for a whole day just to get close to them. His Highness was obviously much kinder now. It seemed that as long as she taught him well, he would definitely not have any thoughts of tying her up in the future. However, these sparrows are not dead, the rice can be eaten. The little boy's handsome side face was still indifferent, but his eyes were more mocking. Hellion Vivian was speechless. So, he fed the food to the sparrows because he wanted to test if it was poisonous? Cherishing little animals and whatnot. She was really overthinking it. However, even the food had to be personally inspected. It seemed that the situation was worse than she had thought. Just like what Beligaju said, the palace maid didn't have the guts to tamper with the food. She was one of the Empress's people, so her food and clothes were not bad. Although she would embezzle from the royal family, she would not make it so ugly. Something must have gone wrong with the food box in the imperial kitchen. And the person who could cause problems in the imperial kitchen should at least be an imperial concubine. Suddenly Hellion Vivian thought of the empress from the Murong family. Thinking about it carefully, she should still be an imperial concubine, right? For an imperial concubine to be able to reach so far, it was clear that the current empress did not care about Beligaju. In addition, there was the rumor that the eldest prince had died a long time ago. The eldest prince should be 14 or 15 years old now. If there were no accidents, it should be time for him to be in the limelight. However, the retired emperor who was not in the capital only doted on the third prince. The relationship between them was not just a little bit subtle. In other words, it was not the former Empress Murong, but the former eldest prince who was secretly bullying Beligaju. What was wrong with these people? Why couldn't they see a child living a good life? His own mother and father did not care about him. As a prince, his life was not even as good as that of a rich family's son, but he still had to endure these schemes. The more Hellion Vivian thought about it, the more upset she felt. Her eyes deepened as if she was thinking about something, and a serious look appeared in her eyes. The reason why a certain highness was in such a situation was because he had not yet hunted the fire Qilin, so his martial chi had not been fully displayed. Secondly, it was because he did not have any relatives behind him, so others could not see what advantage he had in fighting for the position of crown prince, which was why they dared to treat him like this. From a certain point of view, Beligaju had long lost the qualifications to fight for the position of crown prince in this huge battle of the court. Originally, she was the empress, and her birth was nobler than any other prince. However, because the empress did not care, she was not liked by the emperor, causing everyone to not care about this prince. The eunuchs and palace maids in the palace, as well as the generals and ministers outside, all knew that a prince who could not become crown prince was destined to not have a day of prosperity. That was why they dared to bully a certain highness so that they could obtain better power in the future. Hellion Vivian slowly clenched her hands. Didn't they look down on her highness? Then they would counterattack and let these people see who was the one who would obtain the position of crown prince. Hellion Vivian decided that as long as she could stay here, she would help him clear the obstacles little by little and send him to that position. Just as Hellion Vivian was lost in her thoughts, a little girl dressed delicately walked over from not far away. Just like in the dream, the little girl was still very sweet. Her face was white and tender, and she wore a light-colored long dress with a pink fur cloak. She was as cute as a princess, probably the kind of girl that all boys would like when they were young. First, she looked at Hellion Vivian as if she was surprised that there was a servant here. Then she looked in the direction of Beligaju, bent down, put down the food in her hands and turned around to run as if she was afraid that Beligaju would speak to her. Hellion Vivian was originally holding a branch in her hand which was used to catch fish, but now she felt a little pain in her hand. She opened it and found that when she was absent-minded just now, a small thorn had pierced into it. Beligaju held the food and looked at her without moving his expression. Hellion Vivian had a smile on her face, but there was no warmth, probably because she was tired. I remember that you don't have the habit of accepting food from others. The food she brought is not poisonous. Beligaju's voice was very faint, and his eyes seemed to follow the girl into the distance. Hellion Vivian looked at him and said in a low voice, "This is the first time you trust someone so much. Don't tell me that you really like the old Hellion Vivian?" "What?" The little boy's eyes were originally looking at the ice hole on the surface of the lake. If it was here, he wouldn't have needed to use a knife to kill the palace maid without anyone noticing. All he had to do was wait until the sky turned dark and push her into the ice. That would be enough. Hellion Vivian looked at him and shook her head, still smiling. Nothing. He was still young, so there was no point in her asking him. She would wait until she brought him back. Now there was nothing more important than waking him up. Chapter 592. Since there's nothing else, come up quickly after you're done catching the fish. The water is so cold, aren't you? The little boy looked at her indifferently as though he was looking at an idiot. After saying this, he turned around and left with the food. Hellion Wei followed behind him, feeling extremely unbalanced in her heart. Who was she being so cold for? Wasn't it all because she wanted him to eat a good meal? In the end, he hadn't even grown up, yet he had already learned how to flirt with other women. As Hellion Vivian thought about it, she used more strength to chop the firewood. She had a sullen expression the entire time. The little boy looked at her from the side, not understanding what she was angry about. The good thing about Hellion Wei Wei was that her anger disappeared very quickly. After busying herself for a while, a smile appeared on her face again. She reached out and flipped the fish over, then applied a layer of oil on it. She found a few fruits, crushed them and applied the oil on it. In an instant the aroma wafted out. What was the big deal about being able to send food? She could even cook. As the saying went, to conquer a person one had to conquer his stomach. She could be considered someone who had experience in love. Since she could handle the adult version of Beligaju, she could also handle this miniature version. At the thought of this, Hellion Vivian smiled even more beautifully. She even hummed a tune. When the fish was roasted just right, it would release a fragrance. The little boy stood at the side and listened to her instructions. He added another piece of firewood to the fire. Hellion Wei Wei saw that he was extremely adorable, especially since this child was relatively cold and aloof. Under the illumination of the fiery red bonfire, he appeared extremely well behaved. Hellion Wei Wei looked at him and could not help but lean over and give him a kiss. After kissing him, she even smiled at Beligaju. The little boy immediately stopped throwing the match and turned his head, completely not looking at Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian was like a playboy who had flirted with a pretty girl. She continued to roast the meat happily. She cut a knife and handed it to him. "Try it. How does it taste?" The little boy glanced at her and said indifferently, "You want to kiss me again while I'm eating meat?" Having her thoughts exposed, Hellion Vivian paused and smiled. "Am I that kind of person? In the future, don't just casually give birth to relatives." The little boy slowly educated her. He bent down and took a bite of the grilled fish. The fish was very tender, and when he bit into it, the fragrance lingered in his mouth. He couldn't help but take another bite. Seeing that he liked to eat, Hellion Wei Wei took the opportunity to brainwash him. "Let me tell you, the saying of marrying a virtuous wife is not for nothing. When you choose a consort in the future, you must find someone who can cook, especially someone who can make grilled fish." The little boy raised his eyebrows. "Someone like you? Little brat, you really know what to do." Hellion Vivian giggled and said, "I'm just like that. I'm in the hall, I'm in the kitchen, I'm in the army, and I'm in charge of guns. Moreover, I also know how to cut off peach blossoms. You don't know this, but when you grow up you will have a lot of peach blossoms. Without me you definitely won't be able to stop them." After the little boy finished listening to her, he ate another mouthful of grilled fish and said unhurriedly, "By so many people. Isn't it good to like them? Why should this prince stop them?" Hellion Vivian. What he said made sense. She actually had no words to refute it. "Little brat, come here. Let's talk about loyalty and uniqueness." Hellion Vivian felt that the boy must be educated from a young age. "You can't be like your father. It's not right to have 3 palaces and 6 courtyards. It's easy to have weak kidneys. Do you know what weak kidneys are?" The little boy crossed his arms and looked her up and down. "So, the only person who will like you in the future is this prince?" Hellion Vivian felt a little guilty when she heard this, but the corners of her mouth curved up. "Of course. Liar." The little boy turned his face and continued to eat the grilled fish. Did this stupid woman think that he was as stupid as her? She was so good-looking, how could no one like her? Hellion Vivian always knew that a certain prince was smart, but she didn't expect him to be so smart. She shouldn't have exposed herself, right? How did he know that she was lying? However, Hellion Vivian, who had read a lot of books, knew that in this kind of situation, the easiest way to smooth things over was to take advantage of the situation and confess. This was what the domineering CEOs in the books did. She had to apply what she learned. Thus, Hellion Vivian sat a little closer to the little boy and lowered her voice in an attempt to make her look more affectionate. "It's their business that they like me. I've only ever liked you." Hearing this, the little boy obviously paused for a moment. Hellion Vivian thought to herself, "You're touched, aren't you?" She didn't believe that she couldn't win over an 8-year-old brat. Unexpectedly, the little boy looked at her and sneered. "They? It seems that there's more than one. Woman, you're so fickle. How did this prince fall for you?" Hellion Vivian. No, why did she feel that something was wrong? She was clearly the one who was educating a certain prince. How did it become a certain prince educating her? This made Hellion Vivian depressed. Who said that young people were easy to fool? The one in front of her was really too difficult to deal with. This kind of person couldn't be persuaded even if she wanted to. However, this prince can promise you that I'll consider you when I choose a consort. The little boy's tone sounded again, and there was a hint of indifference in his indifference. "But there's a condition," Hellion Vivian originally thought that she wouldn't be able to persuade him. Now that she heard him agree, her eyes lit up. What condition? You can't let other men like you. The little boy said indifferently, since you know how to cut off peach blossoms, I'll cut off yours too. After Hellion Vivian heard this, she smiled very straightforwardly. No problem. Wasn't it just not letting others like her? This was too easy to handle. Anyway, when the time came, her face would turn black and not many people would like her. You have to be absolutely loyal to this prince. The little boy stood up and looked down at Hellion Vivian, who was squatting in front of him. There was a faint trace of gold in his eyes. Hellion Vivian nodded. Okay. Loyalty is a must between lovers. Very good. The contract was established. The little boy smiled. She was finally persuaded by him. Hellion Vivian also felt that it was very good. She didn't realize that she had sold herself at all. She lowered her head and happily ate the grilled fish in her hand. The little boy looked at her again. Don't eat too much fish. Why? Hellion Vivian thought that if he dared to say that she was fat, she would definitely drag him over and beat him up. The little boy moved his fingers and threw the things that he had just picked up to her. And these? I'm not eating. Hellion Vivian was very stubborn. Although the pastries looked good, as a military tycoon with a backbone, she definitely couldn't eat the things of her love rival. Chapter 593. The little boy's thick eyebrows furrowed and his voice was a little cold. You're not eating? If you're not eating, why did you keep staring at these things just now? If I knew you weren't eating, I wouldn't have taken them. From what he said, it seemed that he took these pastries for her. In an instant, Hellion Vivian laughed and snatched the pastry. I thought about it and felt that we should finish it. After all, it's shameful to waste food. Do you? The little boy sat by the fire as if he was too lazy to look at her. Hellion Vivian lowered her head and ate a piece. When she ate something delicious, she picked it out and left it for him. In the cold and cheerless palace, there was finally some warmth because there was one more person making this winter not so cold. The next day, when the little boy woke up, he found that there was one more person in his bed. He was different from him. Her whole body was warm and she gave the blanket to him as if she was afraid that he would freeze at night. There was a small clay pot on the wooden table. The clay pot was still steaming hot and everything looked so beautiful. For a moment, the little boy felt that everything was very unreal. He had never experienced the word warm. Except for the fact that the palace was uncomfortably hot in the summer. Most of the time it was cold here, even the food was the same. In his memory, except when his imperial grandfather was here, those people would smile and try to please him. When his imperial grandfather was not here, they would speak coldly. But now, even his hand was being held warmly by someone. He was a little not used to it. Rather than saying that he was not used to it, it was better to say that until now, he had not seen through this woman in front of him. Why did she get close to him? She even didn't hesitate to make up such a story. She said that the two of them would be together in the future. What and what? The little boy moved his fingers and pressed the strands of hair in front of his forehead. His eyes darkened slightly. Everyone in the palace knew that although he was now a prince, there was no difference whether he was there or not. That was why he could not see through her purpose. When Hellion Vivian saw that he had woken up, she didn't get up immediately. Instead, she laid on her back elegantly, looking as if she had just woken up. It was so cute that she leaned over and kissed him again. The little boy was speechless. Also, she had the habit of asking for family members at the drop of a hat. No other woman would be as bold as her. Beligaju couldn't help but press on his aching forehead. Come, get up. Hellion Vivian didn't have much experience in taking care of children, but she had also been a child. Looking at His Highness's appearance, he should be growing up. At this time, it was the most important time to take care of a child. His nutrition must be balanced. I left the leftover fish head from yesterday and made a pot of fish soup. I also put your favorite mushroom in it. You just got up so you can drink it while it's hot. Beligaju paused. I like to eat mushrooms. You've always been confused about what you like to eat, but you'll know when you eat it. Hellion Vivian stood up as she spoke. The little boy's eyes swept across the food on the wooden table. His voice was indifferent. Where did you get these things? The imperial kitchen. Hellion Vivian curled her lips into a smile. Don't worry, no one will find out. I'm very good at this kind of thing. Although the people in the imperial kitchen checked for poison, they wouldn't check the things in the pot. She took a little here and stole a little there so no one would notice. After all, she was born in the arms business so she could avoid some guards. The little boy didn't continue asking. Yesterday he could tell that her kick wasn't simple. It was rare to see someone who could fight so beautifully. Perhaps even the imperial guards in the palace couldn't do such a fast and accurate side kick. Try it. Is the soup fishy? Hellion Vivian scooped a bowl and handed it to him. His Highness loved to eat fish, but his tolerance for the fishy smell was limited. That was why she added a lot of things to the soup to get rid of the fishy smell. The honey made the fish more tender, the ginger slices and white wine permeated the fish thoroughly, and the mushrooms enhanced the taste. The clay pot had the effect of keeping the fish warm and removing the smell, so he should be able to drink this fish soup. Beligaju took the bowl and tasted it. His indifferent little face immediately changed. There was even a trace of a smile. Woman, you're not useless. Hellion Vivian knew that this was what he liked to drink. His Highness always expressed his love in a different way than others, so she didn't argue with him. She sat on the wooden chair and scooped a bowl of fish soup for herself. The soup was still a little hot, but the hotter the soup the more delicious it was. The soup had been simmering for a long time, so even the fish bones had melted. Coupled with the tender mushrooms, the taste and texture were extremely good. Although the little boy didn't say anything, he drank 3 bowls in a row. His little face was flushed and his eyelashes were even longer. Hellion Vivian supported her chin and looked at him. Do you think it's delicious? As long as you agree to go back with me, I'll make it for you every day. The little boy looked up, then took the handkerchief on the side and wiped the corner of his mouth. You can still make it for me if you stay here. Hellion Vivian. You can't say that. You can't take things from the imperial kitchen so casually. This clay pot has been used once, so don't keep it. After saying that, the little boy stood up. At that moment, 2 figures walked in, supporting each other. The 2 figures were also very small. One of them was a girl wearing a maid's uniform, and she looked to be around 9 or 10 years old. The other one was wearing a guard's uniform and his knee was bleeding. When Hellion Vivian saw the 2 people walking in, she couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. The guard knelt down on one knee and called out to Beligaju, "Your Highness. Your leg is still injured, get up." For some reason Hellion Vivian felt that when Beligaju said those words, his eyes were a little heavy as if he was hiding something. The maid also walked over and said in a soft voice, "Your Highness, this matter isn't Shadow's fault. The Empress just didn't have any other choice, so she lightly hit him twice and punished this servant to recite Buddhist scriptures for an entire night. After all, the Crown Prince didn't show mercy, so we have to give him an explanation. Your Highness, don't worry about this matter. This servant is fine. This Highness understands." Beligage's voice was very faint, and his eyes were half closed so no one could see his emotions. Because of this, Wei Wei suddenly raised her head and glanced at those 2 little bean fellows. So it turned out that the bodyguard was a shadow. Then this little maid. Isn't she Bai Luo? Who is this big sister? Bai Luo also noticed the extra person in the palace, so she tilted her head and looked at Hellion Vivian. Chapter 594. Hellion Vivian looked at Yun Biluo's guarded eyes and suddenly smiled. Her eyes were very beautiful, and her voice was neither fast nor slow with a hint of evilness. "Me? I'm your future princess." Shadow was drinking water, but after hearing this he spat it out. His first reaction was to look at his master's face. Unfortunately, Bailey Jiaju's indifferent little face always made people unable to see the slightest bit of emotion. Yun Biluo was stunned and only reacted after a while. "You, what did you say? Princess?" "Yes." Hellion Vivian smiled and reached out to pat Beligaju's head. Her action was very natural. "We've already decided on this matter, but His Highness hasn't thought of how to tell you. After all, you and Shadow are His Highness's people, so it's better to say it later. Since you should also be mentally prepared. If you don't want to think about it, then His Highness won't have to worry about it. Right, Your Highness?" Beligaju turned around and looked at her with a pair of deep and bottomless eyes. Hellion Vivian felt a little guilty under his gaze. She bent down and whispered, "Cooperate, I'll make you pork ribs tonight." Shadow was still young and did not know what they were talking about, but His Highness had never allowed anyone to be so close to him, and His Highness actually tolerated someone touching his head. Even the retired emperor did not dare to touch his head. How could this woman be so bold? Wasn't she afraid that His Highness would kill her? Little Shadow was already in a daze. His heart was pounding, fearing that Hellion Vivian would be splattered with blood if he was not careful. Yun Biluo's expression was also a little unpredictable. Her eyes fell on Hellion Vivian's hand, thinking about what His Highness would do next. What she did not expect was that Beligaju did not get angry. Instead, he pulled down the woman's hand, looked at her and Shadow and said faintly, "Both of you can leave first." Seeing this, Yun Biluo clenched her hands under her long sleeves, but did not show anything. Instead, she smiled sweetly, "Yes." Little Shadow also reacted and respectfully replied, "Yes, sir." The two little people disappeared in front of the door one after another. When no one was around, the little boy turned around and looked at Hellion Vivian's hand. "When did I say I wanted to marry you? You'll have to marry her sooner or later." Hellion Vivian smiled and rubbed his head again. "Why do you care about these details?" The little boy took a deep breath and said, "If you touch me again, I will chop off your claws." Hellion Vivian looked at the sneering little face in front of her and felt that it was too cute. She really wanted to take this kind of child home and raise it. She couldn't help but touch it again. The little boy did not respond. Hellion Vivian was addicted to touching him. She rubbed his head and said sincerely, "Why were you so obedient when you were young? I really couldn't tell. I can't see any reason why you're worthy of my liking." The little boy pressed her hand and narrowed his eyes. "If you touch me again, I won't choose you in the future." Hellion Vivian burst out laughing. "This is fate. I have to choose even if you don't want to. It's useless to threaten me with this kind of thing." "Good, very good." The little boy smiled slowly. "Then let's see if it works when the time comes." Hellion Vivian felt that she was an arms tycoon who had experienced life and death. Logically speaking, it was impossible for her to be intimidated by an 8-year-old child. However, she did not know if it was because she knew His Highness too well. After hearing the little boy's words, she was a little worried about the future changes. When she was cooking at noon, she put a lot of meat in the pot of rice for Beligaju. The little boy looked at her and did not say anything. He lowered his head and ate. Hellion Vivian supported her chin and looked at him with a faint smile. "Do you really need to believe in fortune-telling? The pot of rice is delicious, right?" The little boy ate a piece of fragrant meat. He did not answer but asked in a slow tone, "Besides mentioning that His Highness will choose you, what else did the fortune-telling mention?" Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. "The eldest prince will die this year. The reason is unknown." She knew that was what the little boy wanted to ask. After all, the current Shadow and Yun Biluo were indeed different to him. Because in this palace, there were only two people who shared weal and woe with him. According to His Highness' character, if his people were bullied, he would not just let it go. Naturally, he would care about the enemy. However, what she did not expect was that the little boy laughed and repeated the two words playfully, "Die young." That was really possible because he had been planning to kill the eldest prince since autumn, but it was not the right time yet. Besides, killing a prince was not the same as killing a palace maid. He had some scruples in his heart. Now that he heard Hellion Vivian's words, maybe he could give it a try. Hellion Vivian looked at his smile and raised her eyebrows. "You don't believe me? He is currently the most favored prince of His Majesty." Beligaju ate another mouthful of pot of rice. This rice was not at all like what he usually ate. It was hot and very fragrant. Hellion Vivian smiled. "In the palace, the most taboo thing is to spoil. Your father is suspicious. It may not be a good thing to spoil him too much." The little boy's fingers that were hidden under his long sleeves paused, but his face was blank. "What do you mean?" "Leave it to me." Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. "I have read a lot of books about palace intrigue. It should not be a big deal." The little boy frowned. "What are you going to do? What do you think of the beauty trap?" Hellion Vivian leaned close to his little face. "I heard that the eldest prince has no resistance to women." Hearing this, the little boy suddenly laughed. It was a very cold kind of laugh. "If you want to serve the eldest prince, you can just say it. I can send you there now. Then I will kill both of you." Hellion Vivian looked at the little boy for a while and touched his face with her hand. "Are you jealous?" The little boy's eyes were cold, but his body was so small, so cold and cute. "Don't be jealous. How can he be compared to you?" Hellion Vivian hugged him and took the opportunity to confess. "I went to take a look just now. That person is far less handsome than you. For me, who is obsessed with looks, of course I will choose the most handsome one." That's right, she was doing things according to the tips on the secret book of chasing wives. Every day she would confess 10 times and get a response at least once. While His Highness was still young and easy to coax, she had to work harder. It would be too tiring to chase after him when he grew up. Who knew that the little boy was not touched at all? Instead, he stretched out his finger and pointed at her forehead. He pushed her away very calmly and elegantly. His voice was leisurely. You are so picky about other people's looks. Chapter 595. Hellion Vivian. You're being mean again. What's wrong with her? She's beautiful and rich. Isn't His Highness looking down on people a little too much? If she beat him up now, would someone sue her for bullying a minor? That's why it's better if you don't use your honey trap. The little boy gave her an arrogant look and said coldly, so that when you're chased out, you won't be able to trace it back to me. Hellion Vivian still wanted to say something. The little boy spoke again with an indifferent expression. Also, your honey trap won't work, it doesn't match. Why doesn't it match? Hellion Vivian raised an eyebrow. Didn't they say that the crown prince likes beautiful women? The little boy looked at her and said, because compared to women, the crown prince likes men more. Peng. Little Shadow, who was carrying the cold dishes, slipped and the food in his hands flew out. But this was not as shocking as hearing his master's words. When did the crown prince like men? Why didn't he know? Shadow was still young. Even though he was still loyal to his master, his expression already showed that he was at a loss. It seemed that he wanted to ask Bailey Jiaju and couldn't help but look over at him. Your Highness, is your leg better? Baligaju didn't wait for him to ask and interrupted him without looking up. And Ing was immediately moved. He held back his tears and said, It's done, it's done. So your Highness, you don't have to slander the crown prince for me anymore. Saying that he likes men is a huge sin. Since it's all better, stay away from the crown prince in the future. Recently he likes to pick on you. Baligaju put down the bowl and chopsticks in his hands. Shadow nodded as his eyes welled up. He didn't expect his master to care so much about him. Ooh, it couldn't be any better. His heart warmed. He must treat his master better in the future. However, little Shadow didn't know that he had just packed up and left the hall. Hellion Vivian moved closer to the little boy's ear and said mysteriously, The crown prince likes to pick on little Shadow? Is it what I think it is? What else could it be? The little boy asked casually. He lowered his eyes and put on the gloves. A smile flashed at the corner of his mouth. You want to use a honey trap? This Highness wants to see just how you're going to use your honey trap this time. Hellion Vivian saw that Zhu An's attitude was very natural. She didn't think that this was a scam at all. She could only sigh and say, Then it seems that we need to rethink our plan to deal with the first prince. No need. The little boy stood up and looked at Hellion Vivian, who was sitting parallel to him on the wooden chair. He pointed at Hellion Vivian and said, I will be busy these few days. Don't go out and cause trouble. It's best if you don't come into contact with any men. Sweat. What kind of tone was that? No matter how he listened to it, it sounded like a big shot in the underworld giving instructions to his woman. He was clearly the arms tycoon. Also, why did that arrogant expression of his that didn't put anyone in his eyes make her want to beat him up? Hellion Vivian felt that ever since she saw the smaller version of His Highness, her hands had become very itchy. It must be because the other party was too vicious, causing her to become violent. What? Do you have something to say? The little boy looked at her condescendingly. Hellion Vivian waved her hand. What else could she say? She couldn't really drag him over and beat him up. Forget it, he was still young. As long as he didn't fool around, she didn't mind letting him have his way. The most important thing was to find a way to clear the obstacles so that he could go back with her quickly. At night, a white fog filled the air. The winter in the north was like this at night. It was so dry and cold that people rarely went out. The river was also frozen solid. Baligaju was still young, so it was almost impossible to find him hiding in the night. But this time the plan to kill had to be stopped. It wasn't because he found out a secret. It was not a big deal for the prince to have an affair with a palace maid. However, when the first prince was about to make a move, he accidentally said, Darling, wait a little longer. Wait for this Highness. When I ascend the throne, I'll definitely make you an imperial concubine. Really? The palace maid's rosy little face was full of flirtatiousness. The eldest prince couldn't care less. He hugged her and fell into the wild grass at the side. The palace maid was none other than the one who had been delivering cold meals to Beligaju for the past few days. The little boy looked at this scene indifferently and slowly curled his lips. Such a blabbermouth prince, he's not far away from death, your highness. And Ing and Yun Biluo looked at Beligaju, who was coming from afar. Their eyes were filled with unconcealable worry. They were still young and had almost no martial chi. Their thinking was not as independent as it was when they grew up. They didn't know what His Highness did when he went out at night. But they knew that since a year ago, whenever His Highness went out, someone would die in the palace the next day. In the beginning, they didn't connect this possibility to His Highness. They only understood what was going on when they saw the blood on the boy's body. They were punished by the Empress today, so His Highness must be in a bad mood. It was because of this that they were even more worried about the consequences that His Highness would face if he were to be discovered outside. Fortunately, judging from His Highness's appearance, no one should have seen it. And Ing couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief and quickly went up to him. Beligaju's black hood was covered in snow. His handsome little face was very cold at this moment, and there was a kind of dazzling red color in his eyes. Yun Biluo stood beside him, looking very obedient, as if she wanted to reach out and take off his hood. Beligaju only glanced at her and raised his hand to stop her. There's no need. Yun Biluo looked at him and paused. Your Highness, the woman who appeared in the palace today, who sent her? Upon hearing this, and Ing raised his head. He also wanted to ask this question. Yun Biluo's choice of words was very good. She was probing. Look at how bold she is with her words. He's pretty too. We don't have anything here. Why was she sent here? Is she here to spy for information? And Ing frowned. Beligaju took off his cloak. His voice was as cold as water. You said just now there's nothing in the palace. Why is she spying for information? But the eldest prince has begun to suspect His Highness, and the emperor asked him to show evidence. Maybe this woman is here to get the evidence? When Yun Biluo was young, she was a little impatient. But at her current age, it was already good that she could come up with such a plan. Besides, Hellion Vivian appeared at a sensitive time. Thinking about it this way, what she did was indeed to lower people's guard. Chapter 596. If that's the case, we'd better be careful when we speak in the palace in case someone tries to trick us. Shadow frowned. Shadow frowned. His Highness's situation was more difficult than any other Highness's. Once he said something wrong, not only would he be punished, he would also bring trouble to His Highness. What the Empress was most unwilling to see was His Highness making a mistake. Take today as an example. It was clear that the first prince's servant had gone too far and bullied His Highness. Shadow merely retaliated, but the first prince made a fuss about it to the emperor. After the emperor heard about it, he would definitely punish the Empress, and the Empress would be unhappy. In the end, His Highness would have to bear the consequences. Yun Biluo thought the same and nodded her head. The main thing is that His Highness went out at night. We can't let her find out. I'm afraid she'll follow His Highness. By then some things can't be hidden anymore. Beligaju's hand that was holding the cloak paused for a moment. Then he raised his hand and put it on again. His voice was calm. I know what to do about her. All of you can leave now. Yes. Yun Biluo was a little reluctant. After all, the three of them were used to depending on each other. It was always a little awkward to have such a woman suddenly appear. Moreover, when she came in this morning, she saw the fish soup that the woman made. That kind of fragrance was never seen in this palace. She also wanted to make something delicious for His Highness. However, apart from her bad skills, it was extremely difficult to get something from the imperial kitchen. She did not know how that woman did it. The more Yun Biluo thought about it, the more she felt that the woman was dangerous. He had to be careful. But, the future Princess Consort? Yun Biluo laughed mockingly. His Highness only had eyes and heart for the Hellion family's beloved daughter. How could he be interested in an old woman who was 8 or 9 years older than him? However, that Miss Hellion did not deserve to be their princess consort. For the past few years, only she and Shadow had stayed by His Highness's side. When had the high and mighty Miss ever paid attention to His Highness? This was good too. Yun Biluo lowered her eyes and smiled faintly. In this way, His Highness could be hers. The night outside the palace grew darker. The moonlight shone down, illuminating a shadow. That shadow was very small and it was cast on the wall. It looked up at the divine beast that was much taller than it. The divine beast's fur was fiery red, as if it had been burned by fire. The color was dazzling. "Master, why are you letting me out?" The mythical beast is very aggrieved. It has to stay in a cage specially made for it, and under its claws is a big pile of cabbage. It has been eating this stuff for 7 days and it really can't bear it anymore. It only begs the little boy to let it go and it will do whatever he wants. In fact, with its strength, this place would not be able to trap it at all. The one who could trap it was the boy in front of it, its one and only master. Beligaju glanced at it and said indifferently, "I've only locked you up for 7 days. Right now no one knew that he had hunted a fire Qilin. He would wait until his imperial grandfather came back and organized the imperial family to hunt. When that time came, the time would be ripe. It's been 7 days. The fire Qilin looked up at the sky and roared, "Do those people still think that master is a useless prince?" Beligaju curled his lips and handed over the cabbage in his hand. His smile was elegant and bloodthirsty. "The game has just begun." The mythical beast stared at the cabbage in front of it and cried, "Master, I'm not hungry yet. Every time it burps, it smells like vegetable leaves. It's such a bad memory." The little boy finally had a conscience and took back his hand. He wiped it with a handkerchief and said, "I've recently found a very interesting prey. When the time comes, I'll lock her up with you." "A very interesting prey?" The fire Qilin's eyes lit up. Could it be the Tunshin? The little boy shook his head indifferently. "It's not a mythical beast, it's a woman." "A woman?" The fire Qilin looked like it was struck by lightning. "What kind of woman is so unlucky?" The little boy said, "She said that she doesn't like locks. The chain you have here happens to be useful." The fire Qilin was speechless. "Master, have you ever thought that she might dislike the chain even more? Your habit of locking up everything as prey is really unacceptable. Not to mention that the other party is a woman. Ever since the pandemonium was destroyed, it had been afraid of women. However, with its master's personality, it definitely wouldn't care what the other party thought. If it wanted to tie it up, it had to do it." However, what the fire Qilin didn't expect was that the little boy actually frowned and said, "Then what kind of lock do you think she'll like?" "Probably won't like any of them. Even a beast like it doesn't like being locked up, let alone a human." The little boy listened with a cold expression. "Regarding this, I'll communicate with her properly. He has to like it." The fire Qilin was speechless. "Then what's the point of communicating? There's no need at all. Master, you actually want to tie her up, right? She's a bit weird, but at least she's not annoying." The little boy tidied up his black gloves. "The trouble is that she's very likely to be sent by those 2 groups of people. If we want to lock her up, it will take some time." The fire Qilin paused. "Since her identity isn't safe, it's best not to do anything." "There's nothing to be safe about." The little boy looked up. His eyes were deep and cold, an elegant aura seeping out from between his brows. On the contrary, his voice was not loud, but it was unforgettable. "As long as you kill the person who sent her, she will be mine." Hearing the little boy's words, the fire Qilin's slender eyes narrowed. According to its master's personality, if he found out that the woman betrayed him, not only would the person who sent her die, even the woman wouldn't be kept alive. Not only did its master's viciousness not weaken because he lost his memories of his previous life, but it was also because of this. As a human, compared to when he was in the demon world, he was even more unpredictable. Although he was just a child, his hands were already stained with blood when he was young. This couldn't be separated from the environment he grew up in. The Imperial Palace was a place that could make people not look like humans and demons not look like demons. If it was the previous master, people would know to avoid him at first sight. But the current master was wearing a perfect disguise, and under the disguise was a deadly poison that was more dangerous than anyone else. At this time there was actually a woman who dared to approach him. I really don't know what will happen to her. Chapter 597. The next day, Beligaju was awakened by the warm aroma of food. He raised one hand and placed it in front of his forehead as if he was not used to it. Hellion Wei Wei put down the vegetable and pig liver porridge in her hand and glanced at the figure lying on the bed. That person's body was small, but he still had the air of a noble. Even when he slept, his posture was standard with both hands placed in front of his body. When he saw her coming in, he moved and turned his head. A pair of deep eyes matched with his black hair. That appearance was extremely handsome. Hellion Vivian was engrossed in watching. The little boy pursed his thin lips and said in a mocking voice, "Idiot." Hellion Vivian was speechless. She had not even said anything and he had already called her an idiot. How was she going to continue living like this? Hellion Wei was preparing to teach the other party a lesson, such as hanging him up in a fancy way or something. However, she saw the little boy suddenly smile after scolding her. That handsome little face instantly made Hellion Wei stop. Looking at such a face, she really could not bring herself to do it, so she simply dismissed the idea. She ate a mouthful of porridge and said, "You should get up and eat some porridge too. After that, we'll discuss how to deal with the eldest prince." The little boy glanced at her and reached out to tug at his clothes. He coughed twice in discomfort. After coughing, his breathing was a little heavy. "I don't have an appetite. Go out after eating and help me close the door." "You don't have an appetite?" Hellion Vivian realized that the little boy's face was abnormally red. She reached out with her left hand and touched him. "Why is it so hot? I will call the imperial physician." The little boy pushed her hand away. "No need. Your cold is very serious. It doesn't look like it just happened." Hellion Vivian glanced at the wet cloak hanging by the window and smiled. "But if you don't want the imperial physician to find out that you went out last night, I can help you lower your temperature." The little boy's fingers paused and his eyes narrowed. He smiled again. "It seems that I have to keep my cloak in the future. I didn't mean to test you." Hellion Vivian curled her thin lips. "I just want to tell you that you can trust me more. You're still young and it's not safe to go out at night. If you want to do anything in the future, just call me." The methods in the imperial palace had always been dirty. Her little highness obviously hadn't awakened yet. He couldn't even deal with a palace maid. If he went out at night and encountered something, how could a child like him deal with it? Hellion Vivian was worried, but at the same time she felt that she had a great responsibility. She reached out to touch his forehead and said, "Take off your clothes first. I'm going to prepare something." The little boy watched as Hellion Vivian left, then glanced at the damp cloak. The warmth in his eyes turned to ice. He didn't expect her to be so smart. It seemed that he couldn't leave these traces behind in the future. "Why haven't you taken off your clothes?" When Hellion Vivian came in with hot water and wine, the little boy did not listen to her. Instead, he reached out and took a fur coat as if he was going to go out. "I still have to pay my respects to my mother." He spoke in an even tone. "I could have gone later. Now that you've woken me up, I might as well go directly." Hellion Vivian reached out to stop him. "You don't have to pay your respects every day. You're sick now. Get your illness treated first." "Sister, don't stop His Highness." Yunbiluo walked in. Although she looked small, she was calculative. "You're new here. You don't know the things in the imperial palace. If you don't pay your respects to the Empress, it's fine. But others will think that His Highness doesn't follow the rules in the imperial palace because of the retired emperor's favor." Hellion Wei looked at Yunbiluo, then at the pale-faced and emotionless little boy. He was still putting on his clothes without any pause in his movements. Yunbiluo was very attentive. She stood beside the little boy and tidied the back of his collar. Hellion Vivian smiled. Her voice was neither clear nor calm. "If His Highness goes to pay his respects today, the Empress won't have time to care about His Highness." "What do you mean?" After all, Yunbiluo was the person chosen by the Empress to be sent to Beligaju. After hearing Hellion Vivian's words, she suddenly turned her head around. Hellion Vivian sat down with her legs slightly crossed. Her eyes were fixed on Beligaju. Yesterday the Emperor went to the Luanfeng Palace on a whim. Thinking about it carefully, the Emperor hasn't been to the Empress's palace for more than half a month. It's inevitable that he'll spend more time there. Does His Highness think that it's appropriate for you to go to the Luanfeng Palace at this time? Why not? Yunbiluo thought a lot. His Highness hasn't seen His Majesty for a long time. It's good for him to see His Majesty. After all, he was his own son. Even if His Majesty didn't value him, he wouldn't let His Highness be like this. If His Highness went to see His Majesty when he was sick, wouldn't it show that His Highness wasn't doing well? In that case, His Majesty might be angry and investigate those who bullied His Highness. Yunbiluo didn't say the latter part, but Hellion Vivian and Beligaju both understood what she meant. It was undeniable that Yunbiluo's idea was good. However, His Highness was still young. It was just an idea without considering the actual situation. Hellion Wei Wei propped up her chin and smiled lazily. I don't know if His Majesty will miss His Highness, but His Highness is already so sick, yet he still forced himself to go. I'm afraid that His Majesty will have a lot of other ideas after seeing him. Don't play tricks in front of a superior unless your tricks are better than his. His Majesty has seen this kind of trick of self-injury once or twice every day in the palace, so it's not rare. Sister, what you said is just your guess. Yun Biluo's expression froze for a moment before she smiled again. Moreover, His Highness is really sick. How can it be a trick of self-injury? Hellion Vivian looked at her and stood up. Her voice was calm. Then I'll say something that I'm not guessing. The Empress has been waiting for His Majesty to go to Luanfeng Palace for half a month. His Majesty finally went, but now he's still there. If His Highness goes there at this time, it's equivalent to interrupting her good deed. Based on your Empress's character, how do you think she will treat His Highness? Yun Biluo's face turned pale. She didn't need to answer this question to know the answer. Everyone in the palace knew that the Empress only had eyes for His Majesty. She would do anything for His Majesty. Why do you think His Majesty went to the Empress's place last night? Hellion Vivian smiled coldly. It's all because of His Highness's needle wounds. His Majesty saw that His Highness was angry, so he couldn't beat him. If he beat His Majesty, he wouldn't be able to explain to the retired emperor. So he coaxed the Empress to beat him. Although he didn't say it explicitly, every time His Highness was abused by the Empress, the Emperor's attitude was right. It was obvious that he was very satisfied with the Empress' way of doing things. How could you let His Highness play the trick of self-injury in front of a person who doesn't care about His Highness? Do you think it's effective? Chapter 598. Yun Biluo was a little girl after all. Her eyes turned red when she heard what Hellion Vivian said. I just want to help His Highness, don't I? You want to help him? It would have been better if Yun Biluo did not mention it. Now that she did, Hellion Vivian was filled with anger. She smiled, but her eyes were cold. You're a girl trained by the Empress. It's impossible that you're not there when the Empress takes action. Why don't you take a few hits for His Highness? Yun Biluo, your love is really limited. This was what Hellion Vivian was most annoyed about. Yun Biluo was obviously a few years older than Beligaju. Even if she could not bear the Empress's identity, she could still help to take a few hits for him. However, looking at the current situation, Yun Biluo could only stand aside when she was with the Empress. That's the Empress. Not to be outdone, Yun Biluo raised her small face and said impatiently, You don't have any sense of seniority, you'll only bring harm to His Highness. Hellion Wei Wei laughed when she heard that. I'm scared because I'm scared. Don't talk to me about seniority. Yun Biluo, let me tell you this, no matter who the other party is, they can't hurt my husband. Even the Emperor must be killed. She just needed to use the right method. Because of this, when the person grew up, he would stain his hands with blood and become a demon step by step. If only one of these people could take a hit for her, Her Highness, the man she cared about and wanted to give the world to, would not be unconscious until now. Hellion Vivian knew that she was venting her anger, but she was really angry. She had never spoken so inappropriately. Her eyes were frighteningly bright. Beligaju looked at her and was obviously stunned. She really looked like a little fox who had exploded into a ball of fur. She was angry because of him. Beligaju had never felt this way before. Someone was angry because of him. Almost everyone in the palace knew why his mother called him to Luanfeng Palace. No one would feel sorry for him because of this. No one would even think of standing up for him. Beligaju knew how dark the palace was since he was young. Between people it was just about using and being used. There was no such thing as sincerity. He was already used to it, so there was nothing he couldn't adapt to. When he reached the top, these people would just be a game in his hands. Therefore he really couldn't understand why the other party would get angry over him. Your Highness. Yun Biluo turned her head to look at Beligaju, who had a blank expression on his face. Tears welled up in her eyes. I don't understand why my sister questioned me like this the moment she arrived, but everything I did was for your own good. Beligaju didn't look at her. Instead he said to Hellion Vivian, You come with me. All of a sudden Hellion Vivian was like a punctured balloon. She lowered her eyes and looked at the back view in front of her. Although she knew it would be like this, it still hurt to experience it personally. If he had grown up, he would have asked Yunbiluo to get lost. However, there were no ifs. He hadn't grown up, he was still so young. How luxurious the palace was how dark and gloomy he was. Even his coughs were intermittent and restrained. That was why he trusted the people around him so much. In this aspect, the newcomer couldn't compare to him. When Hellion Vivian thought of this, she felt a little depressed and lowered her head even more. This was the scene that Shadow saw when he came over. She was clearly taller than His Highness by half a body, but she was following behind His Highness dejectedly, as if she was going to be taken home by His Highness to be taught a lesson. As a shadow, he would never ask too much about his master's affairs. However, looking at Yunbiluo's slightly curled expression, he felt that something was not quite right, so he reminded her, "Don't be too obvious about it. His Highness won't like it if you do that." "I'm against her?" Yunbiluo blinked and tears fell. "Do you know what she said about me in front of His Highness just now? She asked why I didn't block for His Highness when he was being beaten. That was the Empress, how could I block for her? She was obviously trying to drive a wedge between us. In this way, His Highness would be more certain that she was a spy sent by the eldest prince. It's a good thing." Shadow heard this and stopped in his tracks. He said in a steady voice, "If I was there, I would block for her." That was the loyalty he should have as a servant. Even if it would kill him, he would still do it. Yunbiluo was stunned for a moment. She chuckled, "All of them, you make it sound so nice. Would it be useful for her to block for a while?" His Highness wouldn't want her to block for him because that would be too stupid. However, the time to pay respects is almost here. What is His Highness thinking? Yunbiluo looked at the tightly shut door and bit her thin lips hard. In the hall, Beligaju coughed twice and turned to look at Hellion Vivian. His voice was calm. "Didn't you say that you want to cool me down?" Did he mean that he would listen to her and not pay respects? Hellion Vivian's eyes lit up again. She picked up the alcohol and cotton balls that she had prepared earlier. "Go lie down on the couch first and take off your clothes." "You..." The little boy stopped talking. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "What? Why are you angry because of me?" the little boy asked in the end. Hellion Vivian widened her eyes. "How can I not be angry? You're usually so arrogant that I can't wait to pinch you to death. I can't even bear to touch you. In the end, your mother. What's wrong with her?" She felt that the look in the boy's eyes was a little strange. "Can't wait to pinch me to death?" The little boy threw the outer shirt that he had just unbuttoned aside. His action was very cold. "So you have such thoughts?" Hellion Vivian felt a chill on her scalp from his stare. She raised her lips and smiled. "Can you listen to the main point? I'm clearly expressing my love for you." Upon hearing that, the originally cold little boy turned his face away and no longer looked at Hellion Vivian. "Are you always like this?" "Like what?" Hellion Vivian began to find faults in herself. "What's wrong with her?" The little boy's voice seemed to have calmed down. "You always talk about love? Even to others? How is that possible?" Hellion Vivian hugged the little boy and touched his forehead. She took the opportunity to confess, "I'm only like this to you. I'm very cold to others and directly ask them to leave." The little boy paused and turned back to look at her. His long and beautiful eyes were neither cold nor warm, as if no light could enter them. His voice was also cold. "What are you projecting? You want me to ask Yunbiluo to leave?" Chapter 599. Hellion Vivian. How could he guess that? Isn't a certain highness a little too smart? However, this highness won't chase her away. The little boy sat on the bed. His face was very pale and he looked very tired. "Don't cause trouble. Don't go out at night, especially to the Luan Phoenix Palace." Hellion Vivian saw that his voice was hoarse, so she didn't say anything else. She dipped the cotton ball in wine and brought it over. The little boy stopped her and grabbed her wrist. He was very stubborn. "Promise this highness that you won't go to the Luan Phoenix Palace." "I know, I promise you." Hellion Vivian was hurt by his grip, so she stroked his head to comfort him. The little boy's eyes darkened and he leaned on her body. His forehead pressed against her shoulder and his small body said in a muffled voice, "My head hurts." He was acting coquettishly. He was definitely acting coquettishly. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and kissed his hair. "The fever is too serious. It won't hurt in a while. I'll take off your clothes first." "Why do you always want to take off this highness clothes?" The little boy raised his head and looked at her. His eyes were a little golden. After a while, he calmly defined her. Okay, I'm okay. Hellion Vivian stroked his hair while taking off his clothes. The little boy finally cooperated. Halfway through taking off his clothes, his long eyebrows wrinkled. There's no taste in my mouth. It's always like this when you have a cold. Hellion Vivian leaned over and kissed the corner of his mouth. I'll make some red date soup for you to drink later. The little boy was stunned for a moment. Then he slowly lifted the blanket and covered his face with it. He even buried his head under the blanket. His handsome face started to redden a little and he scolded. Impudent. Okay, I'm impudent. Hellion Vivian coaxed him. Then she soaked a towel in hot water and covered his forehead. The little boy closed his eyes as if he didn't have any emotions. All that was left was a domineering voice. Don't randomly kiss people in the future. Who cares about her again? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and rubbed his arm with a cotton ball. She didn't respond. The little boy immediately opened his eyes and said faintly, say yes. Yes. Hellion Vivian smiled lazily. How could he be so controlling from a young age? The little boy nodded. Since you promised me, you better keep your promise. If I see you kissing someone else, you know what the consequences will be. What consequences can there be? Hellion Vivian didn't care at all. Little Wimp was still young, so he couldn't do anything to her. The little boy glanced at her and said slowly, the consequence is that I will never go back with you. Hellion Vivian immediately sat up straight and said seriously, I will never kiss anyone. I won't even touch anyone. As if satisfied with her attitude, the little boy slowly closed his eyes again. If you do well, I'll give you a gift in a few days. As long as you promise to go back with me, it will be the biggest gift for me. Hellion Vivian grabbed his hand and was absolutely serious. The little boy pulled his hand back. It's not that kind of gift. I'm giving you a place to stay. A place to stay? Hellion Vivian was confused. The little boy smiled as if he was very happy. You'll definitely like it. Since you said so, I'll look forward to it. In fact, she still didn't understand why he wanted to give her a place to stay. Hellion Vivian reached out and changed the little boy's handkerchief. When she lowered her head again, Beligaju had turned his face away as if he was asleep. Hellion Vivian's movements became gentler. Knowing that alcohol had a cooling effect, she wiped his fingers more. Your Highness. Yun Bilyua was still standing outside the door and couldn't see what was going on inside. She called out a few times but there was no response, so she couldn't help but raise her voice. Hellion Vivian got up and walked out of the door. Then she closed the door and looked at the little girl in front of her with cold eyes. Yun Bilyuo didn't look at her and continued to raise her voice. Your Highness. She didn't expect that the other party would suddenly grab her neck. The strength was very gentle, but it was filled with a strong murderous aura. Hellion Wei Wei's thin lips curved, smiling mischievously. Younger sister Yun, I'm a person with a bad temper. Especially when I hear noise, my temper will be even worse. When I'm angry, I like to kill people. His Highness is asleep and can't stand your noise. You'd better be quiet, do you understand? Even though she had been in the palace for a long time, she had never seen a woman who could make people tremble from the bottom of their hearts. She was so scared that she trembled. You. Don't be agitated, don't be agitated. Hellion Vivian looked at her with a faint smile. You're trying so hard to make me deal with you because you want to sow discord between me and him. He's never tolerated anyone who hurt the people around him. If I deal with you, he won't be happy. That's why you're still alive. As she spoke, she patted Yun Bilyuo's little face gently. Sister Yun, you're smart, but do you remember what I told you? Don't play tricks in front of the superior. Even if I don't deal with you, someone else will. Hellion Vivian let go of her hand as soon as she finished speaking. Yun Bilyuo looked like she had lost her soul. Her eyes were bloodshot and her lips were pale. She fell to the ground and a strong sense of fear washed over her like a tidal wave. This woman, she even knew what she was thinking. At that moment, Yun Bilyuo felt an unprecedented fear. No. She must tell His Highness what just happened. But in the palace, one couldn't enter the bedroom without the permission of the master. The wooden door in front of her was closed again. Yun Bilyuo clenched her fists so hard that they turned blue. She was originally a palace maid who served. When His Highness didn't say that he wouldn't pay his respects, she could only wait outside. It was freezing cold. In a short while her head was covered with snowflakes. Yun Bilyuo couldn't stand it anymore. She pushed open the wooden door forcefully. Her eyes were red as if she had been greatly wronged. She knelt on the ground with a thud. "Your Highness," as if he was awakened by the noise, the little boy slowly opened his eyes and sat up. He looked at Yunbiluo condescendingly. His little face was so pale that there was almost no color in it, but it couldn't hide the elegance he exuded. Hellion Vivian only paused when Yunbiluo came in. She then continued to cook the brown sugar water in the casserole lazily while fanning herself with the fan in her hand. Yunbiluo bit her thin lips tightly. She turned her head and looked at Hellion Vivian. "Sister, did I do something wrong? Is that why you hate me?" Chapter 600. Hellion Vivian did not speak. She supported her chin with one hand and looked at her with a smile. Yunbiluo felt goosebumps all over her body. After taking a deep breath, she looked up with reddened eyes. "Even if you hate me, you should at least send a message to His Highness. So cold today. Isn't it too much for me to stand outside like a fool? Who allowed you to come in without my permission?" The little boy interrupted her indifferently. Yunbiluo was stunned. Her eyes widened slowly. "You're Your Highness. Get out." These 3 words were neither cold nor warm. Yunbiluo knew that she broke the rules of her master in a moment of anger. However, she did not expect that His Highness would not listen to a single word she said. "Your Highness." Yunbiluo still wanted to say something. The little boy looked at her coldly. "It seems that you haven't stood there long enough. Think carefully about whether I should go greet you or not. Don't cry here. I can tell whether your tears are real or not." What did he mean? Yunbiluo's expression changed. Her fingers were trembling. Hellion Vivian walked over and laughed in her ear. "I told you I don't need to teach you a lesson." Yunbiluo realized that she had been tricked. She originally wanted to provoke Hellion Vivian so that His Highness would no longer trust this woman. However, in the end she was the one who was provoked. She was also the one whom His Highness began to distrust. Yunbiluo clenched her fists but did not dare to make a sound. She only bit her lips and said to Beligaju, "Yes." Then she dragged her 2 heavy legs and returned to her original position. The cold wind blew past her face like a knife. She had never suffered like this before. Her whole body was cold as if she had fallen into an ice cellar. However, she could not leave and could only endure the cold. The little boy retracted his gaze, raised his hand and pinched his forehead. Then his gaze fell on Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian immediately confessed, "I can't stand being bullied. She set me up, so I have to set her up. If you want to blame someone, blame the people around you for thinking too much. Tell me I've been so good to you, but you're always suspicious of me. You can't be like this. You have to know how to be grateful." And, as she spoke, Hellion Vivian felt that the atmosphere around her was too quiet. It was so quiet that her scalp felt numb. When she raised her head, she saw the little boy looking at her mockingly. The coldness in his eyes was very obvious. Hellion Vivian cleared her throat and shut her mouth. "Are you done?" The little boy smiled, but there was no warmth in his smile. Hellion Vivian was eager to try. "Actually, I haven't. You can try saying one more sentence. See if I will ask you to scram too." When the little boy curled his lips, there was always an indescribable charm. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and threw the bowl in her hand. Then she took a deep breath and said, "Drink the red date soup." The little boy did not expect her to have such a big reaction. His fingers stiffened. At that moment he thought that she would turn around and leave. "Don't mention the word scram to me in the future." Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes. "You can't bear to ask me to scram. When you grow up you will only lock people up. No matter whether you're angry or not, you will only be moody. So I can't scram. I have to bring you back. Anyway, pride is not worth much. I'll let you trample on it." Hearing this, the little boy paused and drank a mouthful of the red date soup. He was unprecedentedly obedient. Hellion Vivian smiled and hugged him. "Let's continue to lower the temperature. It'll be faster this way." The little boy coughed a few times. His cheeks were overflowing with a layer of red. His face was cold, but he did not push Hellion Vivian away. Prey needed to be comforted. Since she liked to hug him, he would let her hug him for a while. There was no other master who was more considerate than him. Who cares if he grew up or not? He was him. If she wanted a mature and powerful man, he could give her that now. The little boy's head was heavy as he thought. He held Hellion Vivian's hand tightly. As long as she did not leave, he could give her anything. This sleep was very good. If it was not for the hurried footsteps outside the door, Baligaju would not have woken up so quickly. When he woke up, his palm was still warm. This made him feel that everything was good. He raised his hand and covered her with a blanket. Then he stood up and walked out of the door. Your Highness. When an Ing saw him come out, he said anxiously, the eldest prince went to the emperor and said that you. What did he say? The little boy did not speak. When Hellion Vivian heard the sound, she narrowed her eyes. She did not know why, but she suddenly had a bad feeling. An Ing lowered his head and said in a trembling voice, he said that your Highness is sinister and vicious. The eunuch by his side was killed by your Highness. Your Highness is eyeing the position of the crown prince. That's why you hurt the people around him. The current Bailey Jiaju could not bear such an accusation at all. When he grew up, he still had martial qi and the protection of the Emperor Emeritus. Now that the Emperor Emeritus was not in the capital, he was a child without any relatives. How could he resist? Was the first prince trying to take his life? I understand. The little boy said expressionlessly. After he said it, what was my father's reaction? And Ing shook his head. This subordinate does not know what the emperor's reaction was, but the news of the eldest prince complaining to the emperor has spread in the palace. Your Highness, shouldn't you make a trip to the emperor? No, you can't. Wei Wei's pair of eyes slightly sunk. The emperor has always been suspicious. The more this kind of situation is, the more we can't say anything. Just treat this matter as a joke and that's enough. No one would believe that an unarmed and defenseless little boy would kill an adult eunuch. If your Highness went now, it would only draw the emperor's attention. Hearing this, the little boy turned to look at her. Hellion Vivian thought he did not believe her, so she said seriously, you can't let the eldest prince slander you. The little boy nodded, but no one knew what he was thinking. After listening to Hellion Vivian's words, he did not go anywhere. He stayed in the hall to recuperate and did not go out for 3 days. During these 3 days, Yun Bilyua was much more well-behaved. But when she looked at her aching legs again, her eyes were filled with hatred. She found an opportunity to tell the Empress everything about Hellion Vivian. The Empress had never cared about her gloomy son, but she didn't like him to do anything that was out of her control. Although he didn't come to greet her today and didn't ruin her plans, making her in a good mood, this new palace maid was really meddling too much. Thinking of this, the Empress put down the rouge in her hand and asked casually, how does the palace maid look? Yun Bilyuo's eyes flashed. Oval face, a pair of bright eyes, kind of seductive. Chapter 601. Everyone knew that the word seductive was taboo for the Empress. The one from the Murong family had won the Emperor's endless love with her looks. Yun Bilyuo's words were obviously pushing Hellion Vivian into the fire pit. As expected, after the Empress heard Yun Bilyuo's words, she crushed the rouge in her hand little by little and her beautiful face darkened. Then she seemed to have thought of something and laughed. The eldest prince must be angry because he lost a eunuch. No matter whether it was Juer who did it or not, the eldest prince will be able to calm down and forget about the past with a smile if we send a palace maid over. The most important thing is to prevent that little palace maid from getting close to the emperor. It's better for such a bitch to be taken in as soon as possible so that we can be at ease. Yun Bilyuo understood the Empress's intention and was delighted. She hesitated and said, I'm afraid that His Highness won't agree. No one can do anything when he's stubborn. Let's find a chance to let the eldest prince have a look. The Empress blew on her fingers. If he's satisfied, we won't go to His Majesty and make a fuss. I have my ways to make Juer agree. It's just a little palace maid. Yes. Yun Bilyuo answered softly. She was so excited that she pressed on her left leg that was aching from the cold. As long as Her Highness was involved in this matter, that woman could only scram. The sky darkened. The next day at the Imperial Palace's drill ground. Every year at this time the palace would be especially lively. Most of the aristocratic families would come for the upcoming hunt. Baligaju had recovered from his illness and wanted to participate as well. However, no one would be with him on such an occasion. His identity was honorable, but his position was awkward. The aristocratic families had their own plans, so of course, they would not take the initiative to approach him. Bailey Jiaju stood indifferently and elegantly in a corner with few people. He was pulled aside by Hellion Wei Wei to teach him martial arts. The little boy's moves were decent, but his punches were soft and didn't hurt at all when they hit his body. Hellion Wei Wei's eyes curved into crescents as she looked at him. She bent down to wipe his sweat and fed him a piece of cake. Baligaju didn't like to eat sweet things. Even the pastries he ate were bland. However, it was impossible for the imperial kitchen to put in so much effort to do those things for an unfavored prince. Therefore, the number of times that Baligaju ate pastries could be counted on one hand. Moreover, no one would make him any desserts to eat. This was the first time that she had been valued like this and had been given pastries and fruits to eat. 3 Royal. The little boy was eating the pastries that Hellion Vivian fed him with his head down when a little girl in a fur robe walked over. She didn't dare to look into his eyes and handed over the wooden box in her trembling hand. This is what my mother asked me to give you. Baligaju reached out and took it. The little girl heaved a sigh of relief. She turned around and ran to the other boy. Sticking out her tongue, she said, "My heart almost jumped out of my chest. Is it that scary?" The boy laughed and nodded in Baligaju's direction from afar, which was considered a salute. Hellion Vivian watched the 2 children walk further and further away. She turned around and narrowed her eyes. "Hey, don't tell me that you're really interested in that little girl? Every time something is handed over, I'll take it. This is egg yolk cake." The little boy's voice was faint. Hellion Vivian widened her eyes. "So what? Isn't it just egg yolk cake? Tell her how and she can make it." "Nothing much." The little boy's face was still expressionless. He just liked to eat it. Hellion Vivian was instantly killed. Why did she feel that the words of love that she used to say to chase after her wife weren't words of love? Really, sigh, decadent. While thinking, Hellion Vivian opened the wooden box and stuffed a piece of egg yolk cake into her mouth. She ate until her eyes narrowed. The little boy looked at her from the side. Originally, what he disliked the most was eating while sitting on the ground. It was dirty and unruly. But seeing her satisfied appearance, he didn't dislike it. Holding a handkerchief, he stood in front of Hellion Wei Wei and helped her wipe the corners of her mouth. He said in an indifferent tone, "In the future, eat slower. Don't eat everywhere. You're already an adult, yet you still need this highness to teach you. Hey, isn't this our fearless royal family?" A mocking voice suddenly interrupted. Hellion Vivian turned around and saw that not far away, 3 or 4 young masters of aristocratic families were walking over. The one who spoke was the one in the lead. Young Master Li of the Li family, the son of the powerful General Li, and also the cousin of the eldest prince. He looked like he was 2 or 3 years younger than Bailey Jiaju, but his appearance was evil, and his words were even more arrogant to the point that it was unpleasant to hear. "Third Prince, we came to you today for nothing else. As long as you swallow these 2 earthworms, we'll forget about Xiao's Wuzi's matter. Otherwise, I'll tell my father that you bullied me. My father has many soldiers in his hands. Even His Majesty has to respect him. You tell me, as an unfavored prince, won't you be punished when the time comes?" Baligaju didn't move, but his grip on Hellion Vivian's hand tightened. His eyes, which were covered by his hair, were terrifyingly gloomy. Young Master Li gave a look to his sidekicks and smiled coldly. "Beat him. He doesn't dare to fight back. If he does, I will shout and call everyone here. Just say that he bullied me." She had seen shameless people, but she had never seen such a shameless person. Hellion Vivian clenched her hands, but her heart was clear. No matter how sinister a child was, he couldn't think of such a meticulous plan. Someone must be behind it. Since it was revenge, it wouldn't be as simple as beating His Highness. In order to make His Highness suffer, the Emperor must be present. In other words, the Emperor was very likely to be nearby. So she couldn't make a move. Once she did, the other side would use it as an excuse to make a fuss. At that time, the one who would suffer would be His Highness. One was the son of a powerful general, and the other was a prince that he didn't want to see. According to her understanding of the Emperor, in order to balance the situation, he would completely put righteousness before family and would only do things that hurt his son. There was no time to think about it. The 2 young masters who surrounded her had already raised their right legs. The force of the kick was obviously mixed with martial qi. Hellion Vivian didn't even think about it and protected His Highness with her body. Her back was heavily kicked 3 times, followed by a fishy taste in her throat, but she didn't move away. She only continued to bear the pain of the kicks. She cursed in her heart, so heavy-handed. Baligaju watched this scene. His fingers touched her pale face. His eyes fiercely shook and he couldn't stop the hostility from coming out of his eyes. Chapter 602. At that moment he wanted to kill everyone. He wanted to kill everyone who got close to her. The princes felt that something was wrong. They didn't know where a gust of evil wind came from, but it swept up the snow on the ground and hit their faces, making it difficult for them to even open their eyes. "What's going on?" The little tyrant Li shouted and raised his hand to cover his eyes. When he opened his eyes again he saw Bailey Jiaju, who was supposed to be lying on the ground, standing in front of him. Bailey Jiaju's face was smiling but his eyes were bloodshot. Tyrant Li looked at him and his face turned pale. "You don't come over. If you take another step forward I will. Tyrant Li looked around and bent down to pick up a square brick. However, what he didn't expect was that the person in front of him just curled his thin lips, as if no matter how hard he struggled, he was just a dead object under his hand. Tyrant Li was terrified, but others couldn't see Beligage's eyes. He watched as the person in front of him approached him step by step. He couldn't care less and raised his hand to hit the corner of Beligage's eyes. Bang! A muffled sound came from the square brick. The hurricane stopped. Bailey Jiaju's face was stained with blood. Drops of blood dripped onto his long robe. It looked extremely horrifying. However, his pair of eyes were brighter than ever. It was so bright that people felt a chill in their hearts. It was Tyrant Li who hit him, but he looked like the one who was hit. His eyes were full of fear. You. This guy could have dodged it. Why did he have to take it? What's going on? Such a loud noise would of course cause a commotion. Moreover, the emperor was brought here by the eldest prince. When the eldest prince heard the exclamation, he thought that his plan had succeeded. He immediately pretended to be panicked and said, "Did something happen to Li Yu? Father, let's go and take a look." The emperor wasn't anxious. The anxious one was General Li. When he heard that it was about his beloved son, he couldn't wait to go to the tree. Bailey Jiaju stood with his back facing them. When the eldest prince saw this from afar, he scolded loudly, "Third prince, are you being disobedient again? Look at you, how can you be so ruthless at such a young age? I won't reprimand you for hurting my eunuch, but how dare you bully Li Yu?" When General Li heard this, he also became angry. "Third prince, it's true that Li Yu is immature. After all, he's still young, but he's never done anything wrong. Since you're blocking him here, shouldn't you give this old official a—" The word explanation was stuck in General Li's throat. It was not because of anything else, but because Bailey Jiaju turned his head around. That scene was too miserable. Half of his face was covered in blood, while the other side still had that noble and handsome appearance. Only, his long robes were wrinkled and not a single part of his body was unharmed. It was clear at a glance who was bullying who. Everyone was shocked, especially the palace maids and eunuchs who came with them. When they saw the wounds on the little boy's face, they felt that it was too horrible to look at. How hard did he have to be beaten to cause so much blood? The third prince was indeed not very likable. After losing so much blood, he didn't even bat an eyelid. He just stood there like the king of hell waiting to take his life. When the servants saw this, they couldn't bear it, but also felt that it was inauspicious. The eldest prince was dumbfounded. How could this be? Didn't he say that they were only going to teach him a lesson and not make it a wound? Even if it was a wound, it had to be someone on their side who was injured. How could the one who had his head injured be the third prince? The emperor frowned and said in a deep voice, "What happened? Father." The little tyrant of the Li family immediately threw himself into General Li's arms and was about to cry and complain. But then a loud bang was heard. Someone knelt on the ground. It was incomparably crisp. It was Hellion Vivian. There was only one thought in her mind. No one can think of escaping unscathed after beating up Beligaju. That Li guy injured his head. She will kill his whole family. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and said directly to the people's hearts, "Reporting to your majesty, I don't know if Li Shitzi has any misunderstanding with your highness, but as soon as your highness arrived at the drill ground, Li Shitzi brought the other princes over and insisted that your highness swallow the earthworm in his hand. He said that he wanted to avenge eunuch Swa, who was by the eldest prince's side. Your majesty is wise. The royal family is usually not sociable at all. They did have some conflicts with eunuch Swa, so it's normal for them to be suspected. But even if he was suspected, this matter should be questioned by your majesty. Li Shizi was probably unconvinced in his heart, so he wanted to teach your highness a lesson. Your servant watched from the side and was shocked, thinking that in this world, there was actually someone who dared to bully a prince from outside the palace. How much did he not put the princes in his eyes? Just as I was about to stop him, I heard Li Shizi say. At this point, Helian Wei Wei paused as if she was very worried and looked at Li Yu. What did he say? The emperor's eyes darkened and no one could tell whether he was happy or angry. But the eldest prince, who was by his side, knew that his imperial father was a little angry now. He glared at Helian Vivian fiercely. He cursed in his heart. Damn it! Where did this servant come from? Why is she so talkative? Helian Vivian naturally felt the eldest prince's gaze. She seemed to be very afraid of him and trembled. The emperor turned his head and glanced at the first prince indifferently. It was just a glance, but the eldest prince completely froze. Imperial father, don't listen to this little maid's nonsense. She is by third prince's side. Of course she will side with him. Shut up. The emperor roared and then took a deep breath. He looked at his most guarded son and asked, Third prince, tell me, what did Li Yu say just now? The little boy raised his head. The blood had not stopped and flowed to the corner of his eyes, staining them red. He said that he came to avenge imperial brother and that I should be obedient. Otherwise, his father has so many soldiers in his hands. Even imperial father has to respect him. If I, an unfavored prince, touch him, I will definitely be punished. The little boy's voice was very calm and there was no emotion in it. But he cleverly added the words, he came to avenge imperial brother. And this sentence was what the emperor cared about the most. He was not afraid of his achievements overshadowing his master, nor was he afraid of his subordinates. As long as that general was his, there was no problem. But now it was obvious that the Li family was seriously going astray. The emperor sneered and did not look at the father and son of the Li family. Instead, he looked at his eldest son who was standing beside him. Did he think that he had grown up and wanted to fight for power with him? Father, imperial father. When the first prince saw that gaze, the cold sweat on his forehead began to fall uncontrollably, drop by drop. Chapter 603. After all, Li Bawang was still young and didn't know how to judge the situation. He followed his usual style and burst into tears. He wanted to help the eldest prince out of this situation. His tone was full of grievance. Father, I didn't want to hit Beligaju at all. He could have dodged that blow. Who knew what happened? His head was injured. Father, sob, you didn't see it. He looked like he wanted to kill me. He must seek justice for me. Because every time he did this, he would be the one to benefit. Therefore, when it came to speaking, the little tyrant of the Li family had no scruples. However, what he didn't expect was that his crying did not ease the situation. Instead, it made the atmosphere at the scene stagnate for a moment. The eldest prince desperately winked at General Li, wanting him to stop Li Yu's words. General Li's expression also changed. He covered his son's mouth, his face pale. Li Hailu didn't know what he had said wrong, and he didn't know why his father had such a reaction. He was still struggling unwillingly. The emperor had already smiled and looked very gentle. Beligaju? Liu, is the name Beligaju something you should call? Hearing this, General Li shivered and pressed his son to kneel on the ground. Your Majesty, my son is young and ignorant. He doesn't understand the rules of the palace. Please forgive him. The emperor didn't immediately let General Li get up. He turned his head to look at Beligaju. Third brother, you are the one who is injured. How do you think this matter should be dealt with? The death penalty. These two words were very similar to his style. Of course, the emperor wouldn't listen to him. He was just verifying the truth of this matter. The more murderous Beligaju was, the more real this matter was. You are still the same as before. Too vicious. The emperor's tone was very indifferent, but he was very pleased with his attitude. If his son didn't have such a flaw, he would really be a threat to him. A vicious prince, no matter how talented he was, would not go far. He didn't have to worry at all. However, it was time to teach the other one a lesson. The emperor raised his eyes and looked at the eldest prince. Feng Er, what do you think? The great prince was already panicking, fearing that the emperor would make a decision that would be detrimental to the Li family. He immediately pleaded for leniency. This matter is indeed Yuer's fault. However, General Li has been an official for many years and only has one son. It's inevitable that he would spoil him a little, causing him to become an unbearable debauchee. That's why he injured third prince in a moment of desperation. However, this fight couldn't be caused by just one side. As for what exactly happened, I can't explain it clearly. However, since Ewer has hurt someone, he must be punished. I'll punish him by sending him back to the manor to reflect on his mistakes for half a month. That way he can learn to control his temper. The first prince thought that as long as he said this, the emperor would have some misgivings. However, what he didn't expect was that his pleading made the emperor want to kill him. The emperor was almost certain that the Li family no longer worked for him, but for his eldest son. How could the suspicious emperor allow such a powerful minister to stay? However, there was still some fear in his heart. After all, the Li family was a prestigious family. The emperor's eyes darkened as he hesitantly turned the thumb ring in his hand. "Your Highness, your head." As if unintentionally, Hellion Vivian said softly, "Of all the places to hit, it just had to hit your head. Fortunately, your Highness is tough. Otherwise, there would be one less prince in the imperial palace for no reason. Who knows who will be the next one?" If it was said that the emperor was still hesitating before, then Hellion Wei's words were the last straw that broke the scales of his heart. The emperor didn't need to think to know whose idea it was today. Previously, he didn't want to interfere in the affairs of the princes. There was nothing wrong with letting them fight. Moreover, the one who was bullied was his third prince, the child he hated the most. However, it was different this time. His words clearly showed that he didn't put him, the emperor, in his eyes. He was just a lowly heir, yet he dared to speak so arrogantly. He even wanted to kill the princes. Then, did the person behind him want to take his place for a long time? The emperor narrowed his eyes as he thought of this. There was an indescribable coldness in his eyes. He hurt the princes and still complained that he was wronged. "I don't know when a general could climb over my head. Men, take the father and son of the Li family away from me. Bring all the old subordinates of the Li family to the Ministry of Personnel. If they are still loyal to me, keep them alive. If they don't know how to respect their superiors like Li Yu, behead them on the spot." This was the emperor's temperament. He would rather kill 1,000 by mistake than let one go. Since he wanted to destroy this power, he would uproot it and save himself trouble in the future. General Li didn't expect that a simple fight between children would end up in such a state. His face turned green as he fell to the ground. General Li had been on the battlefield for many years. He didn't expect to taste defeat like this overnight. He had always doted on his son. If his son wanted to bully anyone, he would let him do as he pleased. He knew about the first prince's plan. It was supposed to be foolproof. However, the result was that the Li family lost everything. Where did the variables come from? Was it that talkative palace maid, or was it the third prince himself who they didn't care about? Li Yu didn't know what was wrong with his father. He took the opportunity to twist his small body and said, "Your Majesty, why do you want to arrest us? My father is a great general of the War Dragon dynasty, a great general who fought for you. You can't arrest us." Slap him. This sentence was uttered by Beligaju. His handsome face exuded an air of nobility. The guards who were arresting Li Yu didn't know why, but they subconsciously slapped Li Yu's face. Slap. The sound of a slap landed. Li Yu's entire face was swollen. He kicked his two short legs unwillingly. "How dare you hit me?" He was usually the one who bullied others. When had he ever been humiliated like this? He turned around and shouted at the first prince, "Cousin Feng, kill him. Help me kill him." After all, he was a child. Once provoked, he could say anything. The emperor couldn't hold it in anymore. He kicked Li Yu. The strength of the kick was so great that Li Yu's small body flew up in an instant. He fell to the ground with blood flowing out of his nose. It was a pathetic sight. The emperor's expression was sinister. "How dare you say you want to kill someone in front of me? It seems that the Li family is quite daring. Drag him away." Yes. When the guards received the order, they were all shocked by this scene. However, the little boy who was standing not far away curled his thin lips as he lowered his eyes. This was only the beginning. Chapter 604. Then, the little boy turned around and looked at the pale-faced eldest prince. The eldest prince was still pleading, "Father, the Li family has been loyal for generations. Over such a small matter." A small matter? The emperor's eyes turned cold. Murdering a prince is a small matter? Then what is a big matter in your eyes? I. The eldest prince's life had been too smooth all these years. Everything was arranged for him by others. There was the Lee family outside the palace and his mother in the palace, so he didn't know how to deal with this kind of thing. He immediately panicked. After all, the eldest prince was the only son that the emperor liked. Even if he did something wrong, the emperor would still leave him some leeway. Sooner or later, the retired emperor would come back. He had to have the eldest son to keep the third prince in check. Thinking of this, the emperor waved his sleeves and said, "Eunuch Gao, pass down the order. The eldest prince is indecisive. From today onwards, Fengshao Palace's salary will be halved and he will be grounded for 3 days." Father. The eldest prince looked at the emperor's back as he walked further and further away. He gritted his teeth and turned around to glare fiercely at Baligaju. Baligaju's face was still bleeding. His small face was so noble and exquisite that he didn't look like an ordinary person who should be living in this world. The eldest prince approached him with a cold smile. "You've really grown up, huh?" The little boy didn't say anything. In his eyes, the other party was just a pig who didn't know his limits. He was so stupid that he didn't have any brains. If it wasn't for the emperor's special favor, this person in front of him would have been a corpse long ago. The eldest prince was unhappy with his attitude. He was just a little brat, but he always looked at him like he was superior. "Good, very good." As the eldest prince spoke, he was about to grab Baligaju's collar. There was a eunuch by his side. He was a shrewd eunuch. With one look, he knew that today's matter was not simple. He reached out and stopped the first prince. "Your Highness, the emperor hasn't gone far. You can't be so impulsive." The veins on the great prince's forehead were still bulging, but he had no choice but to put his hand down. His eyes stared fixedly at Baligaju for a while, then he turned his head and looked at Hellion Vivian, who was standing to the side. He suddenly smiled and said, "Third brother, I didn't expect that even though you aren't that great of a person, the servant girls at your side are each more beautiful than the other." When the little boy heard this, the lines on his jaw suddenly tightened. The first prince saw that Hellion Vivian had her head lowered and he could only see a bit of her face. He had other thoughts and couldn't help but want to take a closer look. However, he found that his path forward was blocked by someone. The figure was small, but it gave off an oppressive feeling that made one's scalp numb. The first prince sneered and put his hand on the little boy's shoulder. "Third brother, big brother will give you a piece of advice. Don't always think of singing a different tune from me. Otherwise, don't mention the people around you, you won't be able to protect a single one of them." After saying this, the first prince left with the group of people. However, he didn't feel good. The Lee family had lost power, which meant that the support behind him was gone. The first prince's birth mother, Imperial Concubine Shu, couldn't eat because of the Lee family, but she didn't dare to plead for leniency. Imperial Concubine Shu's heart was clear. With the emperor's suspicious personality, the more she pleaded for leniency, the less likely it was for the Lee family to survive. As long as they could endure these few days, everything would be fine. The emperor was just in a fit of anger and wouldn't really do anything to the Lee family. As long as his anger subsided, everything would return to normal. Concubine Shu steadied her emotions and specially instructed the first prince to not do anything for the next 3 days. He was to stay in Fengshao Hall, abstain from meat and pray for the emperor and not to wander around. She even tried to contact the old subordinates of the Lee family, telling them not to write memorials to the emperor. The little boy was still standing in the drill ground, but his small hands were constantly rubbing the web between his thumb and forefinger. His eyes were also dim and unclear. Originally, he didn't want to make a move so quickly. But there was actually someone who didn't have eyes and wanted to take his prey. The little boy's fingers under his long sleeves clenched, his thoughts heavy. First of all, he couldn't let that woman know that he killed people. In her heart, it was better for him to be perfect. There was no need to let her know about this kind of dark and dirty thing. The little boy lowered his head and faintly narrowed his eyes. "What are you thinking about?" Hellion Vivian wrapped the last of the white cloth around the little boy's head. She was still very distressed. "I don't know when this injury will heal. Today I'll give you a bowl of pork rib soup. It should be good for your injury." The little boy didn't tell her that as long as the Fire Qilin and his Martial Qi were there, it would be easy for him to heal. He only lowered his eyes and said in a faint voice, "I want to eat marinated beef." "No, marinated beef is a food." Hellion Vivian kissed his left eye through the cloth. It's not good for your injury. The little boy nodded and held her hand with an expressionless face. He felt the residual warmth left in his left eye. In fact, he didn't care about what he ate at all. He only said that because he purely enjoyed the feeling of being worried about and pampered by others. Anyway, he had already found out that as long as she didn't meet his requirements, she would kiss him, then let her kiss him more. Thinking of this, the little boy happily curved his thin lips, but his face was so pale that there was no trace of blood. The emperor was no doubt selfish, or it could be said that he wanted to deliberately give Beligaju the cold shoulder and waited until evening to order the imperial physician to come over. Hellion Vivian watched from the side and tightly clenched her hands. He was such an obedient son, yet he wanted to give him the cold shoulder. A selfish and lecherous prince, but he was biased in every way. He was really a good emperor who would do anything for the throne. The little boy watched Hellion Vivian send the imperial physician out and called Shadow over with a faint voice. Shadow thought that his master needed to go to the toilet and was embarrassed to have a woman around, so he took the chamber pot and walked closer. He didn't expect that the little boy would only look at the chamber pot in his hand with cold eyes. His lips were pale, but his voice was low. According to Emperor Murong's personality, he will definitely take this opportunity to ruthlessly suppress the Li family. Go to the Murong palace and directly use a dart to throw this letter into his study room. Don't leave any trace. Isn't it a little too early? Shadow frowned. Didn't Master plan to take action next year? For this reason he specially trained him in Qinggong. The little boy sneered. Someone doesn't have eyes, I can't stand it anymore. Consort Shu wants to protect the Li family, so she doesn't want anyone to plead for mercy for the Li family. I will not let her do as she wishes and destroy the Li family. I want to see how that pig can steal my things. That pig? His Highness is talking about the eldest prince? Shadow's hand trembled. This time His Highness wants to kill the eldest prince? Don't let that woman know about this. Chapter 605. The little boy glanced at him coldly. Shadow's trembling hands trembled even more. He was worried that something might go wrong, so he advised, but if we don't do this well, Consort Shu will definitely suspect His Highness. Then His Highness will be in a more difficult situation. Why don't we wait for the retired emperor to return before? No need. The little boy interrupted him. His left eye was wrapped in a bandage. He looked at him with his eyes without any warmth. Do as I say. Shadow did not dare to say anything else. He lowered his head and answered, yes. That night, after Emperor Murong received the letter, he glanced at its contents. Suddenly, his eyes brightened and he said loudly, someone, give the order to stop Consort Shu's news. The ministers of the Ministry of Appointments and the Ministry of War are to start writing memorials now. Noble Consort Rong, who had just been conferred the title of Emperor Murong, also stood up after hearing Emperor Murong's words. Brother, are you asking these people to write memorials to punish the Li family? No, I want them to protect him. Emperor Murong held the letter in his hand and nodded repeatedly. I don't know who sent this letter. This plan is amazing. Noble Consort Rong frowned. Brother, isn't it too hasty to make a decision based on a letter? Sister, you've just entered the palace, so you don't know the emperor well. The analysis in this letter is comprehensive. The emperor can't tolerate the princes and ministers forming cliques for personal gain. The more people protect the Li family, the faster the Li family will be destroyed. The Ministry of Appointments and the Ministry of War have always been the emperor's biggest taboo. There are too many former subordinates of the Li family in there. Once they plead for mercy, the seed of suspicion in the emperor's heart will completely explode and directly kill the Li family. Maybe even the eldest prince. Emperor Murong laughed at the end, but there was an indescribable coldness. This night was destined to not be a peaceful one. Deep in the palace, in the brightly lit south study, the emperor threw the memorials in his hand out with a bang. The palace maids and eunuchs serving him immediately knelt on the ground. Especially eunuch Gao, who was closest to the emperor. His face was also hit by the memorials, but he did not dare to cry out in pain. He only scratched his head and shouted, Your Highness, please calm down. How am I supposed to calm down? The emperor pointed at the stack of memorials with a gloomy expression. A day has not passed yet. 8 out of 10 of them are protecting the Li family and putting in good words for Feng. Good, very good. Pass down my orders. From today onwards, the Li family's case will be officially handed over to the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs. Remove that Li Si from the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs as well, and let the Murong family's people handle this case. Yes. Eunuch Gao accepted the order and left. The next day, the person that imperial concubine Shu had sent out to inquire about it replied. How is it? What did His Majesty say? She was thinking that since His Majesty dotes on Feng'o, his anger should have subsided after a day. Unexpectedly, the eunuch shook his head and said in a low voice, His Majesty has given full authority to Prince Murong to manage the affairs of the Li family. In the future, this servant will not be able to find out any news. What? Consort Shu's face turned pale and she fainted. Everyone knew how fierce the conflict between the Li family and the Murong family was. His Majesty had given the Li family's case to the Murong family. It was obvious that he did not want to give the Murong family any chance to survive. This news spread very quickly. Other than the eldest prince who was still under house arrest, almost everyone knew about it. Shadow knelt on the ground with one knee and reported to Beligaju without missing a word. When the little boy heard this, he raised the corner of his mouth. You can't take such a blow. You fainted really quickly. Shadow did not say anything. At that moment, other than admiration, there was also a trace of fear in his heart. Logically speaking, he should not be afraid. However, he was someone who knew all of His Highness' plans. Because he knew too much, he felt that His Highness in front of him was so smart that he could not breathe. If His Highness did not have an accurate understanding of everyone, how could this scheme be arranged so closely? Everyone in the palace was saying that the Murong family had won the battle between the Li family and the Murong family. No one knew that everything behind the scenes was set up by an 8-year-old boy. The Murong family might have benefited from this battle in the imperial court. However, he was just a chess piece that His Highness used to destroy the Li family. Until now, Shadow still did not understand why His Highness suddenly decided to take the lifeline of the Li family. He said that the other party did not have eyes. However, it was not the first time that the other party did not have eyes. This time, why did His Highness not hold back and want to destroy the Li family even at the risk of being discovered? Shadow looked at the little boy who was sitting on the wooden chair with a face full of doubts. However, His Highness stopped what he was about to say and ordered in a calm tone, You can leave. Yes. Shadow stood up and only then did he realize that the new head palace maid had walked in. Hellion Vivian did not ask what they were talking about. Holding the clay pot in her hand, she looked at the little boy who was sitting quietly and writing. She reached out and took his brush. Your head has not recovered yet. Don't write anymore. The teacher wants to see it tomorrow. The little boy seemed to be seriously writing just now and took the brush back. Hellion Vivian said, I'll help you write. You go and drink the soup. You'll help me write? The little boy raised his eyebrows. Hellion Wei Wei's fighting spirit was ignited by his mocking gaze. What's wrong with me helping you write it? I want to write 20 pieces. After saying this, the little boy stood up and brought the bone broth that Hellion Wei Wei had cooked to his mouth. He drank the broth in a comfortable posture. Since she was going to help him write, he could also slack off. However, the little boy was originally looking at Hellion Vivian while drinking the bone soup. Halfway through, he could not help but ask, Who taught you how to write? Isn't it very unique? Hellion Vivian looked like she wanted to praise her. The little boy snorted. If being ugly is considered unique, then your writing is indeed unique. Hellion Vivian. Will you die if you don't have a sharp tongue? Sit a little further away. Without waiting for Hellion Wei Wei's reaction, the little boy's voice was very faint. He held the brush through her hand and said slowly, When you're making the tick, you need to use strength in your wrist. For a moment, Hellion Vivian thought that they had returned to the past. At that time, he also hugged her from behind and controlled her hand with a faint smile. When are you going back with me? He blurted out the words almost without thinking. The little boy's fingers paused. At that moment, his eyes became indescribably deep and unpredictable. At this moment, Shadow pushed open the wooden door with a bang and walked in quickly. He looked a little flustered. Your Highness, bad news. Chapter 606. What's the matter? The little boy let go of Hellion Vivian's hand unhurriedly. Shadow's face turned pale as if he did not know what to say. After glancing at Hellion Wei Wei, he said, "It's the Imperial Concubine's side." The Imperial Concubine said that after the eldest prince is imprisoned and killed, she will send Sister Wei over to serve the eldest prince. Bang! The little boy dropped the thing in his hand. He turned his head, his eyes almost overflowing with scarlet. "What did you say?" "Your Highness, I think Her Majesty didn't mean it that way, Shadow still wanted to explain. The little boy smiled. It was extremely beautiful and dangerous, like a snake hiding in the grass suddenly spitting out its tongue. "Go and tell Mother that it's impossible unless she doesn't want Father to go to her place anymore." Yes. Shadow had never seen His Highness like this before. One of his eyes was wrapped in a white bandage, while the other seemed to have been dyed with a different color. He looked as cold and evil as a demon from hell. The little boy's chest heaved up and down, then he said, "Go and get Yun Biluo here." "Your Highness." Shadow was almost frightened by the scene in front of him. Master's face. The little boy seemed to have realized something, his tone gradually slowed down. "Go and get her here." Shadow heaved a sigh of relief. He must have seen wrongly. How could there be a bloodstain on His Highness's face? The little boy stood with his back facing Hellion Vivian, so Hellion Vivian did not see his face. But from Shadow's expression, she knew that it was not as simple as it seemed. She walked over, then squatted down and hugged the little boy from behind. "It's not like you to be so irritable. No one can take anything away from me, especially—" The little boy took a deep breath as if he was trying to calm down. The word "you" did not come out of his mouth. He pinched his finger and blood dripped out. Hellion Vivian was stunned, then she turned his little body around and kissed his forehead. "Calm down, don't let your irritation control you." The little boy trembled, but he didn't look up. He buried his face in her arms and said in a muffled voice, "Forget what you saw just now." Hellion Vivian stroked the little boy's head. She felt as if a part of her heart was about to melt. She had heard a lot in the past and knew that he did not have a happy childhood. But when she saw it for herself, she realized that it wasn't just unhappiness. Everyone wanted to harm him or trample him under their feet. His imperial father and imperial mother were merely using him as a chess piece to weigh the pros and cons of the situation. They were both wary of him and using him at the same time. But Her Highness was still so young. Although he looked cool and cold on the surface, he also liked to poison others. However, when he encountered something delicious, he would still open his eyes wide like other children. But today his eyes were dyed red. Hellion Vivian knew that it was a sign that he was about to become a demon. It turned out that the Imperial Palace had forced him into this state from the very beginning. Hellion Vivian thought of this and hugged him even tighter. But what she didn't expect was that the little boy comforted her in a low voice. "Don't worry, I won't give you away. Although you're a little stupid, it doesn't mean that they can do anything to you." Hellion Vivian. How touching. Wait, what did he mean by a little stupid? "Your Highness." Yun Biluo came in a long time ago, but she was waiting. She wanted to see how long it would take for His Highness to realize that she had come in. But from the beginning to the end, the boy didn't even look in her direction. What was so good about that old woman? Yun Biluo clenched her fists, but her face was full of grievance. "You're looking for me?" The little boy looked at her with cold eyes and said without warning, "Pack your things and go back to Phoenix Palace." Yun Biluo looked like she could not believe what she had just heard. Her eyes shook violently and she reached out to hug the little boy's leg. "Your Highness, I'm not leaving. I've been by your side for 2 years. What did I do wrong? I'll change, please don't chase me away." The little boy looked at her indifferently. "Don't you like to send letters to Mother? Wouldn't it be better to send yourself over?" "Your Highness." Yun Biluo was stunned and her body trembled. You. Get lost." One word without any emotion. Yun Biluo lay on the ground in a mess, her hair was messy and she stared at Hellion Vivian's face. Shouldn't this old woman be the one to be sent out? Why did it become her? It shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be like this. Your Highness, Your Highness. Yun Biluo was held by the shadow and cried, trying to soften his heart. "Please listen to me." However, she didn't get anything other than a cold stare. It took a lot of effort for Shadow to drag Yun Biluo out of the door. He lowered his eyes and looked at her who was sitting in the mud. His expression turned serious. "Last time I told you not to challenge His Highness' patience. He can protect us, but that doesn't mean that we can do whatever we want. You know that His Highness treats Miss Wei differently, but you still told Her Highness about her. His Highness didn't kill you but sent you back to Phoenix Palace. Do you know what this means? Don't think that he's doing this for the sake of the past. His Highness is using you to warn Her Highness. If Her Highness really wants to hurt Miss Wei, you'll end up like Her Highness in the future. Yun Bilua was stunned and then she shook her head violently. Impossible, His Highness can't think like this. He must be misled by that woman and she lied to him again. Shadow, let me in, I'll talk to His Highness personally. Slap. Aning slapped him across the face. His Highness asked me to slap you 20 times. Are you going to take it or leave now? Yun Bilua was disheartened by Shadow's words. She covered her aching face with her hands. Her hands and feet were aching from the cold, especially her left leg which was previously frozen. It was twitching. She wouldn't let that woman get away with it. Even if she left, she wouldn't be able to stay by His Highness' side. In less than 2 days, as soon as the eldest prince was released from his confinement, she would be ruined by him. Yun Bilua thought fiercely. Even if the Li family was destroyed, the eldest prince's power was not as strong as before. However, His Majesty had always doted on the eldest prince the most. As long as the eldest prince didn't do anything wrong, His Majesty could forgive him for everything. What's more, he only wanted a palace maid. Who would stop him? This time, even if His Highness wanted to protect that woman, it would be useless. The day after tomorrow, that woman could only serve the eldest prince obediently. Chapter 607. Looking at Yun Bilua's back, Shadow was a little worried. He was not worried about what Yun Bilua would do, but he was worried that His Highness would be displeased by what the Empress did. If the Empress also found fault with His Highness at this time, then His Highness would be in a dangerous situation. The eldest prince would definitely not take it lying down after such a big thing happened. Once he was released from confinement, he would definitely find trouble with His Highness. Judging from the fact that the eldest prince wanted Yun Bilua, this matter would definitely not end well. Shadow could clearly feel that there was something wrong with His Highness' mood. Ever since the Empress sent the news that she wanted someone, that noble little face of his had always been icy cold. Even when he was about to go to bed, it was still the same. Shadow was afraid that he would do something, but the strange thing was that the little boy did not act out of the ordinary. He did what he usually did today, but his eyes were getting darker and darker, so much so that it made Shadow feel uneasy. Are you still worried about the eldest prince? Hellion Vivian supported her chin with both hands, looking at the little boy lying on the bed. She smiled. Actually, it's very easy to solve this problem. As long as you agree to go back with me, I will immediately disappear from this world. By then the eldest prince will never see me again. What do you think? Isn't it killing 2 birds with 1 stone? Hearing the word disappear, the little boy's hand under the quilt suddenly tightened, but his expression remained indifferent. I said before, you don't have to worry about him. Now close your eyes and go to sleep. Ordering her again, Hellion Vivian realized that although this child was young, he had learned how to order people around. However, he still refused to go back with her. What was he thinking? Did he not trust her enough? Hellion Vivian frowned in confusion. After some time, only the sound of light breathing could be heard in the bedchamber. At this time, the little boy opened his eyes and looked at Hellion Vivian's side profile. There was a hint of coldness in his black eyes. The night deepened a little. The weather was cold, but it made the eldest prince want to have fun even more. He had been locked up for a few days and had no idea what had happened outside. He thought that with his imperial mother around, everything would be resolved quickly. Her heart was really itching, so she called the palace maid who delivered food to Beligaju to come over. She arranged to meet her at the previous place and gave her a bag of medicine. Remember to put this in that woman's food tomorrow and then lead her here. When the palace maid saw the medicine, she knew what it was. Her first reaction was jealousy. Your Highness, what's so good about that woman? She looks older than you. The first prince thought to himself, so what if she's a little older? That's what I want. However, he wouldn't say that out loud. He just coaxed her and said, I just wanted to teach that little brat a lesson. This time I suffered a big loss because of him. If I don't get it back, I won't be able to swallow this anger. Of course, the palace maid wouldn't really take this seriously. Seeing that he kept kissing her, she also followed suit and wrapped her arms around him. The two people fell into the long grass by the river, and it was in full swing. Originally, the emperor had planned to sleep, but because of the memorial, his mood was extremely bad. At this time, the people below reported that they found traces of the fire Qilin in the palace. The emperor's eyes immediately lit up. "Where is the fire Qilin? Quickly bring me there." The fire Qilin was a rare auspicious beast in the world. No matter who it was, they all wanted to be able to tame it and use it for themselves. The emperor was no exception. As long as he thought of being able to own the fire Qilin, the bad mood of the past 2 days completely disappeared, leaving only the excitement of seeing the fire Qilin. The people below didn't dare to delay. The emperor didn't even ride on the dragon and phoenix. He just walked out of the south study with a fur cloak draped over his shoulders and walked towards the river. The weather of the 12th lunar month was very cold outside, especially at night. Everywhere was a vast expanse of white, and even speaking was accompanied by fog. "Where is the fire Qilin?" The emperor was obviously excited, and his tone was not the same as usual. The person who came to report was also very excited. He pointed at the haystack in front of him. "It's on the other side of the river. This servant saw it with my own eyes. It has a body of fiery red hair. With every step it took, the ground would shake. Even the ice in the river melted a lot." Eunuch Gao was puzzled. How could the legendary fire Qilin appear in the palace? Even if it was thirsty and wanted to drink water, it shouldn't be in the imperial garden, right? After all, the fire Qilin hated humans the most. But Eunuch Gao wouldn't say it out loud. He just supported the emperor and kept saying nice words. "Your Majesty, your dragon power is vast and mighty. This fire Qilin must know that its destined son of heaven is here. That's why it appeared in the inner court of the palace to find its master." Although the emperor didn't respond, his expression showed that he was very pleased with Eunuch Gao's words. However, at this time the small figure standing in the night laughed. There was a hint of mockery at the corner of his mouth. His voice was low and evil. "Did you hear that? They said you are here to find your master." At this time the fire Qilin had transformed into a human form. His long red hair was covered under a black hood. Only his smiling lips could be seen. "I am indeed here to find my master, but I am not looking for him. But master, I really don't understand. Why do you only want me to show my face once? In fact, I can help you kill the eldest prince that you hate. Was it necessary to spend so much effort to attract the emperor? If you kill him, there will be blood everywhere. It will be very noisy." The little boy tidied up his sleeves. His eyes were cold. "Sooner or later they will know that I am your master. At that time you will bear the crime of killing the eldest prince. There will definitely be people who will suspect me. There are too many ways to kill people. There is no need to use such a stupid way." The fire Qilin raised his eyebrows. "Your Highness, what are you going to do? Let him die by himself." The little boy slowly turned his head, and there was a hint of viciousness on his godlike handsome little face. The fire Qilin still didn't understand. It heard the sound from the grass getting louder and louder. The emperor and his people were afraid that they would frighten the mythical beast, so their footsteps were very light. The closer they were to the river, the more cautious they were. The person who led the way saw the movement in the grass and immediately pointed in that direction. The emperor held his breath and wanted to quietly approach. But he heard a familiar voice coming from there. "What else can my father do other than put me in confinement? I know that he dotes on concubine Rong so much now. He will agree to whatever that woman says. I think my father's brain is not working well. Sooner or later I will." Chapter 608. The eldest prince didn't finish his sentence, but this sentence alone was enough to make the joy on the emperor's face disappear completely. Eunuch Gao wanted to remind him, but the emperor held his arm tightly. He seemed to be extremely angry. His chest heaved up and down and his teeth creaked as he gritted them. The two people in the grass were still lovey-dovey. How could they know what had happened? The palace maid nestled in the eldest prince's arms and said sweetly, "Your Highness, don't forget this servant when the time comes." Of course, seeing that the two people were about to be intimate again, the emperor kicked the palace lantern in the eunuch's hand over. The eldest prince was shocked and shouted, "Which blind thing dares to disturb me?" He had come here many times. Under normal circumstances, no palace servant dared to come here. They were afraid that if they saw something they shouldn't see, the eldest prince would punish them. That was why the eldest prince was so arrogant. He pulled his clothes over and planned to go out and teach that person a lesson. But before he could stand up, a gloomy and cold voice sounded in his ears. "Eunuch Gao, go and tell this unfilial son who disturbed him." As soon as he heard the words Eunuch Gao, the eldest prince's expression changed. His lips trembled as he called out in fear, "Father." The palace maid was even more scared. With a bang, she knelt on the ground. Looking through the grass, she could only see a corner of bright yellow. She kept kowtowing and didn't dare to say a word. The emperor didn't care about feelings for a palace maid. "Throw her into the river." "Yes." A few guards lifted and put her down. The sound of water splashing could be heard. The palace maid didn't even have a chance to struggle before she was drowned in front of the eldest prince. The eldest prince was stunned. With a pale face, he slowly knelt on the ground. "Father, this child didn't do it on purpose. This child just..." The emperor didn't even look at him. He turned and left. He only asked people to put him in the water to sober him up. In this kind of weather, going into the river and getting into the water could cost a person his life. It seemed that this time the emperor was really angry. It was obvious why he was angry. Not only did he not see the auspicious beast he wanted to see, but he also heard the first prince's treacherous words with his own ears. Right now the emperor couldn't wait to cripple him. However, he was still his most beloved eldest son after all. In the end, he did not kill him. The great prince was only wearing a pair of cloth pants. He trembled as he stood on the shore. His lips had turned blue. However, none of this could stop the chill in his heart. His head was already in a mess. He began to think in a panic. When did his imperial father come? What did he say? How much did his imperial father hear? The more he thought about it, the more panicked he felt. No, he had to find imperial father and explain. The great prince wanted to walk out of the water, but he didn't expect to see a little boy in the grass. He was too familiar with that little boy. He had a small body, but he always had an annoying sense of oppression. Obviously, the thick grass gave him a good cover. The two guards in the distance were talking and did not notice him. The first prince's expression immediately turned ugly. "Why are you here?" He would never have thought that today's meeting was related to a child. However, the little boy's next words completely froze him in place. He said, "Of course, it's to see what you look like before you die." The first prince's expression froze. His eyes suddenly widened. For the first time, he seriously looked at the little boy who was always bullied by him. There was anger in his eyes. "You deliberately led imperial father here. It seems that you are not so stupid that you can't be saved." The little boy brushed the cloak on his body. "I waited for so many days. Finally you came out again. It really wasn't easy." The first prince was completely enraged by his attitude. He pulled him over. Just as his fist was about to hit him, the little boy easily caught it in his palm. "You." The first prince looked at the little boy's face in shock. Baligaju only smiled. The corners of his lips were very cold. "Originally, I didn't plan to get rid of you so quickly, but you didn't have eyes and wanted to touch my most important thing. You monster." The first prince roared. "Does Imperial Father know about this? I'm going to tell Imperial Father Oh." There was a splash. The first prince's entire body fell into the water. He struggled very hard. His hands reached up, but he couldn't resist the little boy's strength. Is it important whether that person knows or not? What's important is that in a short while, the news of a prince's premature death will spread in the palace. After saying this, the little boy stood up and hid in the grass. The first prince was still struggling, but it was obvious that he had no strength left. In addition, the water was full of ice. It was impossible for him to swim to the shore. The guards heard the commotion, but by the time they pulled the first prince out, he was already dead. If it was summer, it might be easy to save someone in the water. However, it was winter. The survival rate was low, let alone rescue someone. No one would have thought that a punishment would cause a prince to lose his life. When the emperor heard the report, he was stunned. His heart ached for the first prince, but he also felt relieved. He didn't know what to feel at that moment. Consort Shu, who couldn't take the blow, went crazy. She rushed to the riverside with disheveled hair. She touched the first prince's cold body, crying and laughing at the same time. She said that she was going to settle the score with Consort Rong. She insisted that it was Prince Murong's family who had caused her son's death. As a result, the favor that Prince Murong's family had received from the emperor became a hot potato. They had to be careful in their actions. No one would have thought that all this was related to an unfavored little boy. Except for Hellion Vivian. Her profession had determined her way of thinking. In addition, when she was in the Tang sect, she had specialized in criminal psychology. Therefore, Hellion Wei Wei's ability to analyze matters was always close to the mark. Early the next morning, after Hellion Wei Wei overheard the palace maid's whispers, she instinctively linked the eldest prince's death to Bailey Jiaju. Her eyes darkened as she thought about it. The little boy was still the same as before. He woke up at the right time. After rubbing his beautiful eyes, he put on his clothes and washed his face. He asked her, "What are we going to eat today?" Hellion Vivian glanced at the black cloak hanging in the corner. Her voice was calm. "It's you, right?" The little boy paused in the middle of washing his face. He replied slowly, "What do you mean by right?" "The first prince." Hellion Vivian only said 3 words. The little boy gripped the towel tightly. He seemed to be worried about something. Chapter 609. Hellion Vivian's gaze fell on his face. "You killed him, right?" The little boy looked at Hellion Vivian for a long time. He supported his injured left eye with one hand and suddenly laughed. With a hint of mockery, he said, "So what if it was me? What? Do you think that I'm not the cute and innocent little prince in your heart who only knows how to be bullied? Instead, I'm a demon freak, so you're starting to be afraid?" Hellion Vivian looked at his little hand that was holding the towel tightly and sighed. "I'm just asking you. I didn't think so much. Besides, I never thought that you were naive." It was not a match at all. He should know how black-bellied he was when he looked in the mirror every day. The little boy didn't expect to get such an answer. He was a little stunned. Feeling the warmth from her hand, he seemed to be whispering to himself, "Are you really not afraid of me? What's there to be afraid of?" Hellion Vivian took the towel from his hand. "Don't hold it. If you hold it again, your hand will bleed again. But you're still young. In the future, you should leave this kind of killing and arson to me." The little boy looked at Hellion Vivian for a long time. Then he stretched out his slender finger and tapped on her forehead. "Idiot. Hellion Vivian. Wait a minute. She should flip through the book first. In this kind of situation, shouldn't he be moved and immediately go back with her? Why did he attack her with words again?" The little boy looked very happy. Even when he was eating, he had a smile on his face. "In a while, come with me to see where you live. Tomorrow we can move it into the bedroom." Hellion Vivian said, "Oh." In her heart, she was still thinking about how to kidnap him. She didn't care about where she lived. When she arrived at the back of the mountain, she was stunned. Did she have to live in a cage? Also, the guy next to the cage, didn't he look a little too familiar? "Fire Qilin, why are you here?" After Hellion Vivian finished asking, she felt that she had said something nonsense. Since Baligaju was here, the Fire Qilin who was loyal to him must also be here. In addition, the reason why the Emperor went on a night patrol yesterday was also because of the Fire Qilin. Everything made sense. The Fire Qilin was originally in the palace, and it appeared here under the instructions of a certain highness. The Fire Qilin had lived for so long and had seen many women, but he only had 1 or 2 impressions. It just so happened that Hellion Vivian was among them. It still remembered how fearless she was back in the 10,000 Demons Hall. However, a human's lifespan was limited. It had already been several hundred years, so how could she still be the same as before? "Are you a human or a devil?" This was the first sentence Fire Qilin asked when it saw Hellion Vivian. The little boy raised an eyebrow. "You know each other?" "His master." The Fire Qilin told the little boy everything that had happened. No one noticed that when the little boy heard these words, the little boy's smile disappeared. Hellion Vivian didn't say anything superfluous and went straight to the point. "Since you are here, then everything is easy. If I didn't guess wrong, you must be looking for His Highness Soul Fragment now, so you should also recognize this red string." With that, Hellion Vivian raised her left hand. After seeing the red string, the Fire Qilin was surprised and a little understanding. "So that's how it is. It turns out that the soul fragment that I couldn't find, His Highness left it in the past. That's right." Hellion Vivian smiled and turned to look at the little boy standing on the side. She reached out and touched his head. Now you should believe that I didn't lie to you. What she didn't expect was that the little boy laughed in a low voice. This is why you are so good to me. In the end I am just a fragment. Hellion Vivian was stunned. It's not what you think. Then what is it? The little boy looked up and shook off her hand indifferently. Your purpose is to make me go back with you. Hellion Vivian couldn't refute this. However, he couldn't get the answer he wanted. The little boy's lips turned white and his head hurt badly. He thought that it was probably because he was exposed to the wind for too long last night. But what was the use? She didn't want to stay at all. He thought that there was finally someone. Heh. The little boy smirked. He thought too much. But he still hoped that there was a little warmth. Because it was too cold to be alone. If I don't go back with you, can you not leave? The little boy's voice was a little hoarse. He thought that she was just lying to him, but now he knew that she might really disappear one day. The suffocating feeling made his chest ache. I will ask Yun Biluo to leave, but I won't lock you up. If you like mature and powerful people, I can do it too as long as you give me a little more time. So, can you stay and don't go? Hellion Vivian looked at the little boy's expression and shook her head with difficulty. Her throat hurt when she spoke. I can't stay. Once I agree, you will never wake up again. So you still want to leave? He was begging her like this. She still didn't want to stay? The little boy didn't know how to describe that feeling. He didn't want to do anything. He didn't want to walk or move. He just stood there and looked at the golden cage that was covered with a blanket. He made this golden cage especially for her. He knew that she liked gold, so he took out all the rewards that his imperial grandfather gave him since he was young and used them to decorate this cage for her. The blanket inside was the most comfortable one, and there was even a luminous pearl. He thought that she would be happy and maybe even smile and lean over to kiss the corner of his eyes. However, after coming here, she only cared about talking to Fire Qilin, and didn't even look at the cage. He thought that he would never experience the feeling of suffocating from heartache in his life. But now he understood what it was like. It was like riding a roller coaster with ups and downs in his emotions. When he finally calmed down, there was only emptiness. He was like that golden cage, beautifully packaged and joyfully presented in front of her. But she put him aside casually and only wanted him to go back with her. Fire Qilin sensed Beligage's fluctuation and immediately stopped this conversation. Let's talk about this later. If there is a problem with the eldest prince, the Empress will definitely look for you. Your Highness, you and Miss Weiwei should go back first. After saying that, he gave Hellion Vivian a look. Hellion Vivian knew what Fire Qilin was worried about. They were all worried that Beligaju in front of them would be demonized early. Her heart was more worried than anyone else. Looking at the little boy's lonely appearance, she almost agreed. But she couldn't agree. Chapter 610. And Ing could clearly feel that his master's mood was not quite right. He went out happily, but when he came back his little face was a lot more lonely. This was the first time he saw his master show such an expression. In his impression, His Highness had always been indifferent. Even when he was badly hurt by the Empress, he never showed such an expression. It was as if he was abandoned by the whole world. And Ing called out worriedly, "Your Highness." But he didn't get any response. The little boy stood beside the desk, his fingers frozen there. And Ing still wanted to say something, but the Empress sent someone. She said that she wanted Beligaju to go there. There was no trace of expression on the little boy's face. And Ing grabbed the person's hand. "Head maid, His Highness didn't do anything wrong recently, right?" The Empress, "What are you talking about?" The Empress asked the royal to go there. Of course she has her own plans. The maid shook off little and Ying's hand. However, she was blocked by Hellion Weiwei, who walked in. "Head palace maid, no matter what, His Highness is still a prince. The retired emperor has not returned yet. When he returns, he will know who is good to His Highness and who is bad to His Highness. Now in the entire palace, only the third prince is left. Head palace maid is a smart person, you should know what to do." Hellion Vivian's words were hard at first and soft at the back, so the head maid couldn't help but think about her words. After thinking about it, she understood. "Sister, don't worry. The royal family won't suffer losses with me on the Empress side." Of course, things were not that simple. The death of the eldest prince made the emperor stay in the palace for 2 days. Naturally, he didn't go to the Empress side. The Empress wasn't in a good mood, but she wasn't in a bad mood either. She looked at the little boy standing in front of her and said in a casual tone, "The crown prince's death was too timely. I can let that maid stay by your side for a while longer, but why did you chase Biluo back?" That's what it is." The little boy turned his face sideways, his eyes calm. "Don't think about the people around me in the future unless you don't want to see that man again." The Empress took a deep breath. "Are you threatening me?" The little boy did not comment. "Do you know who I am? I am your mother. You even dare to threaten your mother. He really is a demon." The Empress' smile suddenly turned cold. "How did I give birth to such a cold-blooded demon like you?" The little boy smirked, his eyes dark. "So don't provoke me." The Empress looked at him and slapped him. The teacup in his hand flew out and smashed into the little boy's forehead. Fram. Blood seeped out from the white cloth, but the little boy didn't care at all. His head was still dizzy as he walked towards his bedroom. Then he met the little girl from the Hellion family. This time she didn't even speak. When she saw him, she was so scared that she immediately ran away. The little boy pressed his finger against his forehead, and a mocking smile appeared on his face. Thinking of the woman who had anxiously asked him if he liked this little girl, he inexplicably found it funny. He couldn't even be bothered to look at this kind of porcelain doll who was so afraid of him, so how could he like her? He accepted those things only because he thought that she would want to eat them. He had never felt this kind of feeling before. He wanted to get someone so much that even his blood was hot. He originally thought that he was her one and only, because the way she looked at him was too warm. He liked it when she looked at him like that, as if she would only smile at him when he turned around. But in the end he realized that he was just a soul fragment to her. If it wasn't because he was a fragment of that person, she wouldn't even look at him. The little boy chuckled. As soon as he stepped into the hall, Shadow gasped and hurriedly ran to call for the imperial physician. When he came back, the little boy was already asleep. His face was so pale that there was no color. Hellion Wei didn't know anything about this. This was the first time she felt uncertain about her own way of doing things. Now she finally understood what the Fire Qilin had said. It said, "Remember, no matter what will happen to His Highness, you can't agree to let him stay." But in fact it wasn't that simple. She hoped that she could always stay by his side. Her little highness, black-bellied, smart and very proud. When he was sick he would always find ways to act spoiled to her. He would put his head on her shoulder, or he would say in a muffled voice that he didn't like anything. When she kissed him he obviously liked it, but he still pointed at her forehead and told her to stay away from him. How was she supposed to reject him when he was like this? Hellion Vivian clenched her hands and looked at the lake surrounded by white fog. Her eyes were red. She had told him before. She would do the dirty and bloody things. This time was the same. Even if she was hated and resented. He must go back with her. "I'm very happy that you didn't waver." The Fire Qilin's voice sounded in Hellion Vivian's mind again. It sounded very tired, but things are a little bad. Hellion Vivian's heart tightened. "What do you mean?" "And history is a little different from the past. Although the general direction is not wrong because of your appearance, some things happened in advance." The Fire Qilin seemed to be trying hard to support something. Fortunately, it hasn't caused a big mistake. This can be made up. The bad thing is that the soul fragment has autonomy. We have underestimated His Highness. You know, he won't be tamed by anyone. Hellion Vivian's voice was faint. "I have never thought of taming him. I just want him to live and stand in front of me." The Fire Qilin looked at her red eyes and lowered its head. "I was wrong. However, once a soul fragment has its own autonomy, it will be very difficult to bring him back. Moreover, his current thoughts have already affected the third fragment. Right now, the second and third fragments are showing signs of merging." "Signs of merging?" Hellion Vivian was stunned. "What do you mean?" The Fire Qilin's voice was very deep. "According to the appearance of the two fragments, it means that His Highness left the fragments in the past. From the demon to the human, His Highness lost all his memories. He won't remember your appearance in the demon world. But the next fragment he will inherit the existing memories. If you want His Highness to wake up, you must bring the two fragments back together. So the plan needs to be adjusted. You go directly to the time when the third fragment appears." "No." Hellion Vivian paused. "I haven't." The Fire Qilin lowered its voice and interrupted her. "You will leave sooner or later. It's better to leave early." Chapter 6:11. Hellion Vivian's fingers stiffened. I know. The fire Cheelan's voice gradually became weaker. Large snowflakes fell from the sky and dyed Hellion Vivian's eyelashes white. She reached out and patted her face but couldn't resist the sadness in her heart. She slid down the wall and fell to the ground, her shoulders trembling. The north wind whistled past. That night the little boy didn't sleep well. He had a dream. In the dream she said that she was very cold and looked at him pitifully. As a qualified master he couldn't let his prey be cold. He remembered that he had put a fur coat in his bedroom and ran to the inner room. But because he was too small he couldn't reach it at all. He anxiously ran in circles and didn't care about anything else. He moved a chair and climbed up, his fingers reaching for it again and again. In the end he finally got the fur coat. However, there was already a figure beside her. It had his appearance but was much more mature. Tall and big, he could easily hold her in his arms and use his own body temperature to warm her. She curled her lips and didn't have her usual arrogance. She just nestled in the arms of that figure, obediently like a well-behaved fox. The little boy stood just a door away from the inner room. He stared blankly at this scene as if he was a little fool. He held the fur coat in his hand and when he put it down he found that there was a cut on his knee. It was probably when he was climbing the chair and knocked into the wardrobe. The sudden pain spread from his leg to his chest. He was in so much pain that he found it difficult to breathe, but he still wanted to look at her. For the first time in his life he hated that he was younger than her. He hated that he wasn't tall enough. He hated himself. But what was the use? She didn't even look at him. The little boy held the fur coat tightly in his hand and asked, Why did she have to choose that person? Why couldn't he? He asked until his voice was hoarse, but he still didn't get any reply. Your Highness, Your Highness. It was Shadow. Wounds that had been treated should not be touched, but since His Highness fell asleep, Shadow was worried that His Highness would touch his forehead. The little boy finally woke up. After realizing that everything was just a dream, he let out a sigh of relief. Then he stood up from the bed and coughed a few times. His little face was abnormally red. He thought that as long as he went to find her and let her see his wound, she would definitely care about him. Therefore he didn't care about anything else and just ran out. But the room next to it was empty. The little boy's hand froze. His grip on the doorknob tightened as he turned around and shouted, Shadow, where is she? Her. And Ing was stunned, then realized who the little boy was talking about. He said, Since you came back, Sister Wei has been in the room and hasn't come out. I thought she was asleep, so, before he could finish his words, the little boy ran off and barged into the Phoenix Palace. He looked at the Empress with cold eyes. Where is she? Where did you take her? Who? The Empress narrowed her eyes. Do you know what you're doing? How dare you barge in without notifying me? Where is your etiquette as a prince? Bam. The little boy threw the lantern in his hand to the ground. His eyes were bloodshot. She's gone and you're still talking to me about etiquette. Where is she? I don't know who you're talking about. The Empress looked at the pair of red eyes and began to feel uneasy. I didn't touch the people around you. The little boy actually knew that it couldn't be the Empress. He just wanted to come and take a look even if there was a slight possibility. But in reality she was nowhere to be found. It was as if she had never existed. The uncontrollable panic was like a tidal wave drowning him. The little boy returned to his original room. The world was so quiet that it was scary. He stared at the bed and his eyes trembled slightly. Then he raised his hand to cover his eyes and took a deep breath. He was the only one left in this space. All the reports said that she was gone. The little boy clenched his fists so hard that red marks appeared on his palms. Just as his fingers slowly loosened, something slid down from his eyes. He didn't know how long he sat on the ground. Maybe it was 2 hours, maybe it was 4 hours. In the end he chuckled lowly. Crack after crack appeared under his feet. In that instant, it was as if the entire room was trembling along with him. In the midst of the flying sand and stones, a small figure walked out from the darkness. His delicate face was still covered in blood. Behind him was a collapsed house. The snow and dust soaked the entire palace. Cough, cough, cough. When Hellion Vivian opened her eyes again, she was in the sacrificial palace. The young version of Nangong Lai was looking at her as if she was a monster. He even poked her face with the sacrificial crutch in his hand. He had an unruly appearance. Hey, are you a human or a ghost? Why are you here? Hellion Vivian pressed her temples. She couldn't help but wonder if the fire Qilin sent her to the wrong place. Are you a mute? Nangong Lai's youthful and handsome face slowly approached. Suddenly he smiled wickedly. This is really interesting. I was just helping Aju with his divination and went out for a while. When I came back you appeared in the divination. Tiske, don't tell me you're Aju's destined Hongwon? When Hellion Vivian heard the two words, Aju, her heart ached. Nangong Lai touched his chin. You look good, but why do I feel like I've seen you somewhere before? Where is he? Hellion Vivian put down her hand and interrupted him. Nangong Lai raised his eyebrows. You're not a mute. What a pity. Aju doesn't like talkative people. Hellion Vivian smiled. I don't like talkative people either. Master Lai, it's more practical to tell me where he is. Him. Aju? Nangong Lai looked at her playfully. Did you appear here on purpose? Don't waste your effort. Other than the one from the Hellion family, Aju won't look at any other woman. Speaking up to this point, Nangong paused and stared at Hellion Wei seriously. Wait, you look so alike, don't you look a little too alike? You can't be her, right? Hey, your joke this time is too much. Why do I feel like I'm a few years older? Do you know that Aju is looking for you everywhere? Chapter 6:12. Hellion Vivian's head still hurt a little, but she knew that Nangong Lai was treating her as another Hellion Vivian. However, she did not deny it, because from what Nangong Lai said, it was very likely that this Hellion Vivian could see Beligaju very easily. But it's still very strange. Why did you change a little? Nangong Lai looked at her. And your skin looks very good. Hellion Vivian did not speak. After all, she was different from the previous Hellion Vivian. Apart from what Nangong Lai said, there was also her personality. She was afraid that if she spoke there would be more loopholes. At this time Nangong Lai suddenly laughed with an evil look. I thought you changed just now. Turns out that you are still the same as before. You will only lower your head no matter what you say. How boring. But who asked Aju to like you? Let's go, I will take you to see him now. If he knows that you are that Hongwon, maybe he will give me one or two of his death servants. Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed. Aju likes you? What does that mean? But how did you come in? Did you grow wings? Nangong Lai led her forward while muttering to himself in doubt. He secretly decided to strengthen the guards of the holy worship temple. Hellion Vivian did not listen to him. Her heart was full of only one thought, that she would be able to see Her Highness soon. Her pulse was beating a little fast. Hellion Vivian tried to suppress her trembling fingers so that she would not lose her composure. This time she did not know what he would be like. And she left so suddenly, would he blame her? She did not know why, but as long as Hellion Vivian thought of that small figure, her heart would hurt fiercely. Wait a minute. Nangong Lai stopped. At this time, Aju must still be sleeping. You know, he is very sleepy. Hellion Vivian nodded. Nangong Lai looked at her silent appearance and laughed again, but with a bit of coldness. Maybe it's not appropriate for me to say this. Can you not always use this kind of method to make Aju anxious? Hellion Vivian frowned and was about to speak. Nangong Lai smiled faintly and interrupted her. I know, you always feel that Aju doesn't like you enough and that you don't feel safe. But you also have to understand, every time you don't see him, Aju will look for you like a madman. He is a prince and also the one who is most likely to become the crown prince in the future. The empress just passed away not long ago. Aju not only has to look after the seventh prince, but he also has to be on guard against the four great families at all times. This kind of loss of self-control is simply harmful to him, so I want to ask you to use your brain a little. Don't always use the trick of disappearing to verify Aju's love for you, understand? Nangong Lai's words gave Hellion Vivian a lot of information. The empress had just passed away not long ago. That also meant that the person in charge of the harem was the one from the Mu Rong family. There was also little Seven who needed to be taken care of. In other words, Beligaju should be around 16 years old now. However, what did Nangong Lai mean by liking her? Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes. Suddenly, she had a strong feeling of uneasiness that made her suffocate. It shouldn't be like what she thought. It definitely wasn't like what she thought. Right, you can go in. Aju is inside. He even threw a big tantrum just now. Nangong Lai half curled his lips. He'll be fine once he sees you. Obviously she was about to see him, but at that moment Hellion Vivian actually couldn't take a step forward. She knew that everything had a cause and effect. She wasn't by his side when he needed her the most. Instead, the little girl who always brought him food was always there. She never thought that she would be replaced one day. But when this day was about to come, Hellion Vivian actually felt a little scared. She had always been ruthless, and the way she did things was also ruthless. Before she met young Master Tang, her world was a sheet of black. That was the black of powerlessness. She watched herself sink bit by bit, but she couldn't get any help. Later, she finally had the ability and thought of ways to avenge her mother. When she took away the family business, her father pointed at her nose and scolded her for being heartless. She broke one of the ribs of that mistress in front of him. Maybe she was really heartless, but she also met someone who was really good to her. He raised her like a prey. His methods weren't gentle, and he always looked at her with a cold expression. But when her stomach hurt, he would hold her in his arms and not let her feel cold. No matter when he grew up or when he was young, he would always push the food she liked to eat in front of her. This person was no longer around. What should she do? This person gave all his love to others. What was she going to do? Why aren't you moving? Nangong Lai frowned and looked at her. Hellion Vivian clenched her hands and straightened her back. No. Even if he was no longer around, she still wanted to take him back. Only then did Nangong Lai smile. As he walked inside, he said carelessly, "Aju, look at who I've brought." In the midst of the incense, a young man in an ivory-white robe stood with his back against the light. He had a tall and slender figure, straight and powerful legs, and a thick layer of snow fur around his collar. He gave off a noble and scholarly aura. He was still holding a memorial in his hand, casually flipping through it. He didn't turn his head, but his voice was cold and thin, like a top-notch treasured sword that finally showed its sharpness. "If you make any more noise, get out." "Aju, don't be so cold. Let's turn around and have a look first." Nangong Lai smiled wickedly in the direction of Hellion Vivian and lifted his chin. Only then did Bailey Jiaju look in the direction of his gaze. He seemed to heave a sigh of relief. His voice was a little soft. "Where have you been? Didn't I ask you to wait here? Why did you disappear when I turned around?" Hellion Vivian lowered her head. Her whole head was buzzing. She clenched her hands and felt that her throat was sore. She couldn't say a word. "Why aren't you talking?" Baligaju's face was smiling, but there was no warmth in his eyes. But compared to when he was in front of others, he appeared much gentler. Everyone said that the handsome and incomparable royal family used all his good temper on the eldest daughter of the Hellion family. Nangong Lai finally saw it for himself. However, what was so good about this Hellion Weiwei? She was timid and afraid of trouble. Furthermore, she had an unclear relationship with Murong Feng. Why would Aju be interested in her? At this time, Shadow's voice suddenly came from outside the door. "Your Highness, Miss Vivian has been found." As he spoke, he walked in with a young girl. Chapter 6:13. The girl was about 13 years old. She had already grown up, but she hadn't changed her childhood temperament. With a little fear in her expression, she glanced at Baligaju and admitted her mistake in a low voice. "I didn't mean to." "Wait a minute." Nangong Lai reached out to touch his forehead and pointed at the girl. "Are you Hellion Vivian?" The girl nodded and bit her thin lips. She knew that this genius priest didn't like her, but she didn't expect that he would ask who she was. Didn't His Highness tell him? Nangong Lai saw this and cursed. "What the hell? Master Lai." Shadow knew that his master treated Hellion Vivian differently, so he couldn't help but remind, "His Highness is still here. What's wrong with him?" "I just want to ask if she is Hellion Vivian then." Nangong Lai turned back. "Who is this woman?" Hellion Vivian, who was called, stiffened her fingers. Then it was the most familiar indifference. "This question I also want to know." It was Baligaju. He walked slowly towards Hellion Vivian. The girl didn't know what was going on, and her pair of shapely eyebrows were tightly knitted. "Are you going to keep your head down?" Baligaju's gaze fell on the hairy head in front of him. His left hand holding the booklet was so tight that it almost turned white. The surrounding wind suddenly turned cold. His eyes were as cold as the frost in winter, but they flashed with an unknown flame, causing people to feel intimidated just by looking at him. Hellion Vivian knew that she couldn't hide and there was no way to hide anything. She straightened her back, raised her head and smiled at him lazily. "It's me, I'm back." At this time Hellion Vivian saw the boy's appearance clearly. Compared to when he was an adult, he was more noble and clean, showing off his ability. That kind of handsome almost had a diamond-like light with a texture of cold texture. She didn't know if it was her illusion, but Hellion Vivian felt that his beautiful eyes seemed to be fiercely shocked at that moment. As it turned out, she had thought too much. He looked at her with a calm and indifferent expression as if he had never seen her before. However, she could still hear a trace of familiar mockery in his words. "So it's you." The situation was better than Hellion Vivian had imagined. She thought that he would not even know who she was, but now she could at least be sure that he remembered everything from the past. However, the more it was like this, the more Hellion Vivian felt her throat dry up. He remembered everything, but he treated her like a stranger. "Audiobook, do you know her?" The more Nangong Lai looked at her, the stranger he felt. Who is this woman? Why did she look exactly like Hellion Vivian? Baligaju didn't answer his question. Instead he said, Wei Wei, come here." Hellion Vivian was dazed for a moment, thinking that he was calling her. But when the young girl obediently walked in front of him and raised her head to look at the young man, Hellion Wei Wei felt her legs stiffen as she stepped forward. "Don't run around in the future, okay?" The young man's voice was already pleasant to listen to. Coupled with the gentleness in his voice, it could make people feel that even the air was sweet. The young girl nodded obediently and looked at Hellion Vivian with her big eyes. She was indescribably cute, as if she was surprised that there was someone who looked so similar to her. Hellion Vivian felt as if she had fallen into an ice cellar. Fortunately, before entering the room, Nangong Lai's words had prepared her mentally, so she didn't collapse on the spot. However, she had already expected this situation, so she was exceptionally calm. Even Hellion Vivian admired herself a little. She didn't turn around and leave. Her hands and feet seemed to be frozen. The moment her blood returned, she smiled at the two people in front of her. She had always known how good he was at spoiling people. She also knew that not many girls could refuse him. Yes. Hellion Vivian saw the shyness and obedience on the young girl's face. She thought that if heartbreak could make a sound, she just wanted to cover her ears and not hear or see. But in fact, she couldn't back down. The more this situation was, the more she wanted to make herself invincible. "To be honest, other than the fact that my face is the same as yours, there's nothing else that's similar to yours. What do you think?" Hellion Wei Wei's eyes were all smiles as she looked at the young man in front of her. Baligaju seemed to have heard a joke. His thin lips curled into a mocking smile. Hellion Vivian never did things according to the rules. Anyway, what he said would only make her more sad. She simply didn't listen and rushed over to kiss him. When Nangong Lai saw this scene, he sucked in a deep breath. However, Bailey Jiaju only paused for a moment. In the next second, he directly flung her aside. The back of his hand brushed past his thin lips. The light in his eyes was clear and cold. "Don't you think too highly of yourself?" Hellion Vivian put her left hand on the cold floor. It was a little painful and a little cold. Maybe she really did think too highly of herself. Hellion Vivian sat on the floor and held her forehead and laughed softly. "Just a kiss and you have such a big reaction?" Hearing this, the young man's eyes became colder. Because she said that she didn't care, he clenched his fingers. "Only a casual woman like you would treat a kiss as a greeting." Hellion Vivian froze. Casual woman? Nangong Lai, on the other hand, was in high spirits as he looked at Hellion Wei Wei. His eyes were filled with deep rumination and admiration. There were many people who liked Audiobook, but she was probably the only woman in the world who would throw herself at him and kiss him. Others didn't know Audiobook's character, but he knew. If he really hated him, it wouldn't be as simple as throwing him away. From his point of view, Audiobook was clearly angry because he had lost his first kiss without any warning. However, he felt that the atmosphere between these two people was strange. Moreover, looking at Little Shadow's expression, there seemed to be something else going on. Nangong Lai touched his chin and fell into deep thought. The young girl's mouth was wide open from the beginning. She was obviously shocked by Hellion Vivian's action. Your Highness, Baligaju didn't look at the young girl. Instead, he lowered his body and looked at Hellion Vivian. With a cold and deep voice, he said slowly, "She's just an insignificant person." After that, he stood up and said to Aning, "Don't let anyone in so casually in the future." Shadow said with difficulty, "Yes." His eyes were fixed on Hellion Vivian's face and didn't move away for a moment. After all, no one else knew. Only he knew what happened that year. Chapter 6:14. How can you blame an Ing for this? Nangong Lai looked at Hellion Vivian with a smile that wasn't a smile. I was the one who brought this woman in. If you want to blame someone, blame me. It's good to look exactly the same. Otherwise, I wouldn't have brought her in front of you. Aju, how about this? Since I'm the one who caused this trouble, then I'll settle it. I'll immediately take her out of the palace. You and Miss Hellion must have a lot to talk about, so we won't disturb you. After saying that, Nangong Lai wanted to reach out his hand. Baligaju looked at him coldly. That kind of warning gaze made Nangong Lai's hand freeze in place. Aju, this won't do, that won't do, what do you want? Nothing. The young man's voice was very cold, with indifference. It's just that no one can leave unscathed after touching me. Nangong Lai was stunned. Aju, you can't be serious, she just kissed you, you can go. The young man's calm voice interrupted Nangong Lai's words. Nangong Lai was dumbfounded. Aju, I came to find you this time for a serious matter, you're red. I don't want to talk about serious matters today. The young man looked at him and smiled, but there was no warmth in his eyes. Do you want to go by yourself or do you want me to kick you out? Nangong Lai's scalp went numb, he cleared his throat. I'll go by myself, but there's a condition. Speak. The young man frowned with a faint impatience, but because of his age he looked very good. Lend me one of your death servants. Nangong Lai smiled charmingly. The young man didn't look at him again. You go and pick one yourself, it's best to get out of here right now. After getting what he wanted, Nangong Lai didn't stay for a moment longer. After throwing Hellion Vivian a look that said I want to help but can't, he immediately left. He actually wanted to watch the show for a while, but he wasn't in a hurry. After all, there would be plenty of time to inquire about gossip later. Nangong Lai's departure seemed to have taken away the only warmth in the palace. However, Hellion Vivian was glad that she had this little bit of time to catch her breath and sort out her emotions. The young girl also realized that something was wrong. She reached out and tugged at Baligaju's sleeve. Your Highness. Baligaju turned around and said with a smile, Are you angry with me? The girl's voice was very low. The young man's elegant side profile revealed a hint of gentleness. Why would I? I'm just a little anxious. I know I won't mess around in the future. As if making a promise, the girl opened her eyes wide. The young man nodded, looking extremely doting. Hellion Vivian looked at this scene and did not show any expression. She only felt cold from the beginning to the end. She wondered if she should leave first. He would find a corner, lick his wounds and come back to fight again. Because it was so painful that he couldn't breathe. Probably because there was another person present, the young girl was a little uncomfortable and frequently looked in the direction of Hellion Vivian. The young man also noticed her gaze and said in a faint voice, You go back first, I'll deal with this matter. The young girl didn't want to leave. She didn't know why, but ever since she saw the woman who looked exactly like her, she always had an uneasy feeling. The difference was that this woman was more mature than her and she had never seen anyone like her. When His Highness was angry, she could still keep a straight face. Miss Vivian, this subordinate will send you out. Shadow naturally knew what his master was thinking. He walked to the side of the young girl and tried to lead the way. The young girl raised her eyes and looked at Baligaju with her beautiful eyes. She didn't do it on purpose. Your Highness, don't be too harsh on her. Don't worry, I know you don't like to see blood. The young man seemed very considerate. He smiled at her. Follow Shadow. The young girl nodded and couldn't help but look back at Hellion Vivian. The door was closed. In the empty room, only Hellion Vivian and the young man were left. You also heard it, she doesn't like blood. The young man walked to the wooden table, picked up the teapot and poured a cup of tea. So I won't do anything to you. Hellion Wei Wei made an odd sound and suddenly felt sullen. Damn it. Why are you so obedient when it's someone else? Why is it that when you're with me you only know how to bully me? Don't even talk about listening to me. Usually, other than having a poisonous tongue and being arrogant, when have you ever been gentle to me? What about you, do you have anything else to say? The young man brought the tea to his lips. Suddenly he seemed to have thought of something. His fingers paused, but he didn't drink the tea. Instead, he put it back to its original place. Hellion Vivian smiled and shook her head. Originally, she had a lot of things to say. Who knew that the third fragment would be like this? After all, she wasn't made of iron, so her fingers were hurting. Hellion Vivian suddenly didn't have the strength to speak. The young man slowly tightened his grip on the teacup in his hand and smiled coldly. You have nothing to say? Her silence, her indifference, and her indifference all turned into sharp thorns that pierced into his heart. Apart from the coldness, he couldn't feel anything else. But the young man waved his hand, and an iron chain appeared in front of Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian was stunned. The young man got closer to her. His face was perfect and flawless, but the words he said went straight to her heart. Since you don't care about anything, I can just tie you up and give you away. Hellion Vivian raised her head and looked into the pair of emotionless eyes. Her heart seemed to be tightly clenched. Do you hate me? You really think too highly of yourself. The young man sneered and turned his back. Hellion Vivian lowered her voice. I don't think highly of myself, I just don't want to see you unhappy. The young man's back suddenly stiffened. She was bewitching him again. He was really good at it. 8 years ago when she kissed him, he would feel warm all over. He couldn't wait to give her all the best things in the world. For her, he had done too many stupid things. Even the cage had to be made of gold just to please her. Actually, at that time he had already understood that he couldn't grasp her heart, but at least he could have her body. Because he thought that she cared about him more or less. But later he found that as long as this so-called soul fragment didn't agree to go with her, she would immediately disappear. She didn't even hesitate and didn't care about what would happen to him. The bone-piercing hatred surged in his heart, and the young man's eyes were corroded by darkness again. His deep eyes were obviously very beautiful, but because of the layer of ice, they were so bright that it made people's hearts feel cold. He stared at her, his eyes cold. Chapter 6:15. Who said I'm not happy? The youth smiled, his face was too handsome. Can't you see? I'm very happy that I have someone by my side. Compared to you, she's very obedient and very young. Hellion Vivian's blood seemed to have solidified, but the corner of her mouth curved up. I didn't expect you to like such a young one. We're about the same age. The youth's voice was faint. It's because you're too old. Oh no, it should be said that until now you've always been the same age. 8 years to you, it's just a blink of an eye. Hellion Vivian lowered her head and looked at the iron chain under her feet. So, who are you going to give me to? Who do you want me to give you to? The youth's voice turned cold. Hellion Vivian looked at him for a moment, then something flashed in her mind. Suddenly she smiled. I think Nangong Lai is not bad. You see, he's handsome, good to women, and has power. Listening to her words, the youth's eyes became colder and colder. I really underestimated you. You have power and influence, huh? Your Highness, you're the one who asked the question, I'm just answering. As Hellion Wei spoke, she lowered her head and picked up the iron lock. She tied it around her body and said seriously, all right, you can send me away now. The young man looked deeply into her eyes and said in a deep voice, this is what you want to say to me after 8 years. Truly. Forget it and throw her out for me. Hellion Vivian. To be honest, she was a little dumbfounded. According to her speculation, shouldn't he let her stay? Why did it happen to be the other way around? Perhaps she had thought too simply of things. After so many years, there were too many unpredictable things. She couldn't guess the youth's mind. Hellion Vivian was indeed thrown out, but because she was still wrapped in iron chains, the scene attracted the attention of the palace people. However, she couldn't just leave like that. She thought about it and said to Shadow, just now, your master said that he would give me to Nangong Lai. How do I get to the temple of ancestral worship? And glanced at her but didn't say anything. His face was tense. Little Shadow, even if your master doesn't recognize me, you still have to recognize me, Hellion Vivian said with a smile. Back then you still had to call me Sister Wei. Shadow stopped in his tracks and turned back to look at her. Things are different now. What's the difference? Hellion Vivian smiled. Shadow lowered his eyes. His Highness has already fallen in love with someone else. There are some things that you shouldn't do. Just follow his lead and your situation will be better. Little Shadow, thank you for being so considerate. Hellion Vivian stretched lazily. The chains were still rattling. There are some things that I still have to do even if he likes someone else. However, I will try my best to follow his wishes. Shadow hesitated for a while and said, "Are you really going to Master Lai? Your Highness asked me to go. If I don't go, what if he gets angry?" Hellion Vivian twirled the chains around her fingers as if she was thinking about something. That being said, he felt that His Highness would be even more unhappy if Sister Wei went to Master Lai. Shadow didn't say this sentence out loud. He just sent her to the Temple of Ancestral Worship. Nangong Lai was wearing a holy priest's robe, pretending to perform a divination. When he saw Hellion Wei being chained up and sent in, the corners of his eyes twitched. "What is the meaning of this? Don't you want a death attendant? I'm one too." Hellion Vivian was tired after standing for so long. She found a chair and sat down. Nangong Lai looked at the chains on her body. His eyes were full of playfulness. He was very familiar with this chain. It was made of ice iron. He had asked Aju for it several times before, but he didn't give it to him. Now he used it to tie a woman. "Master Lai, His Highness said that if you are not satisfied, you can let her go elsewhere." Shadow immediately opened his mouth. He thought that Nangong Lai would understand what he meant. After all, Master Lai was one of the few people who understood His Highness. However, what he didn't expect was that Nangong Lai laughed. "How can I not be satisfied? Aju gave me a beauty. I can't be happier." Just with the ice iron chain he wanted her to stay. "Master Lai." Shadow still wanted to say something. Hellion Vivian said, "Little Shadow, since Master Lai is satisfied, you can go back and report." "Yes, go back and report." The smile on Nangong Lai's face grew. "Don't forget to thank Aju for me." Seeing this, Shadow had to lower his voice and said, "Yes." After he left, Nangong Lai turned around and looked at Hellion Wei. His slender fingers rested on his chin as he smiled and said, "Tell me, what can you do?" "Beat people up." Hellion Vivian gave him 2 words with a smile. Nangong Lai's mouth stiffened. Then he curled his lips. "What were you thinking at that time? You pounced on him and kissed him. Weren't you afraid that Aju would kill you on the spot?" "He won't." Hellion Vivian was sure about this. However, some situations were still out of her control. For example, he might fall in love with someone else. Nangong Lai's eyes were devilish. "Did something happen between you and Aju?" "Nothing." She couldn't let others know about the soul fragment. Hellion Vivian's voice was flat. Nangong Lai laughed. It was a little cold. "Do you think that I am blind? Between you and Aju, I can still do one thing." Hellion Vivian slowly interrupted him. "I am good at wooing people. For example, I am good at wooing Qingzhan." Nangong Lai was stunned. He stuttered, I don't know what you are talking about." "The first step to wooing a woman is to give her flowers." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "Do you give Qingzhan flowers?" Nangong Lai's face turned red. "Ha ha ha. Why would I give a girl?" Hellion Vivian didn't say anything. She just looked at him. Nangong Lai's voice gradually lowered as if he was talking to himself. "What flowers should I give?" Hellion Vivian looked at the young man in front of her and curled her lips. She thought to herself, "I can't handle His Highness, but I can handle you. A bunch of kids who haven't grown up yet." "Roses. Giving 1 means you are the only one. Giving 3 means I love you. You see, how many do you want to give?" Nangong Lai's eyes fluttered. "What do you mean I love you? I can't say that." "Give 1. Then I will give 1. Wei raised the corners of her mouth. As far as this young master was concerned, the meaning of gifting 1 flower should be even deeper than gifting 3 flowers. Chapter 6:16. I love you. Maybe he would say it many times. But the only one was the most touching. This guy had already regarded Qingzhan as his only one. How cute. Maybe it was because her love life was not smooth. Hellion Vivian found Nangong Lai much more pleasing to the eye. Nangong Lai was still a little innocent when he was young. He would blush when he heard Qingzhan's name. He still trusted Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian patted him on the shoulder and said, "If you call Qingzhan, she might not come out. You can send her roses and I will help you ask her. Okay, as long as this is done, I can help you with whatever you want to do." The two of them hit it off and talked about a lot of plans to woo her. Shadow was still standing outside the holy worship palace. He thought that Master Lai would not be able to stand the fact that His Highness sent a woman to him. Maybe he would chase her out after a while. However, he did not hear anything after waiting for a long time. He had to go back to Beligaju to report. Your Highness. Shadow knelt on the ground and looked at the noble young man sitting on the chaise lounge. He hesitated for a while and did not know how to speak. The young man seemed to be a little careless. He moved his finger away from his thin lips and said calmly, "Is Lai's objection too obvious? Then bring her back to—" Before the young man could finish his sentence, Shadow broke out in cold sweat and said, "Master Lai did not object. He let her stay." Let her stay? The young man's finger that was holding the teacup paused. His eyes were deep. She did not ask to come back? Shadow shook his head. There was a crack. The teacup broke in the young man's palm. It was not clear whether it was tea or blood. The young man's face was calm. This teacup is too fragile. Send another batch in. Ning lowered his head even more and swallowed his saliva. Yes. That was a teacup given by the retired emperor. There were only 1 or 2 sets in the world and it was broken by the master. Lai doesn't like people around him. She won't be able to stay for long. The young man's cold voice sounded in her ears. Ning nodded quickly. Young Master Lai is indeed like that. However, a day passed. Not only was there no news of the retreat from the ancestral hall, everyone was saying that the prodigy priest had been enlightened and brought a maid to pick flowers outside the palace. Picking flowers? After the young man heard this, he sneered, "I really didn't expect the priests of this dynasty to be so leisurely. Since that's the case, arrange more things for young Master Lai to do, so that he won't feel that life is meaningless." On the other side, Nangong Lai, who was eager to chase after her, was unaware of everything. As soon as he returned to the ancestral hall, he was overwhelmed with official duties. He didn't even have time to sleep, let alone make an appointment. Why are there suddenly so many things happening in the palace? Nangong Lai put his handsome face on the table and felt that he was about to collapse. However, he was sensitive and still felt that something was wrong. His left hand lazily supported his chin and his long eyebrows frowned. It's too strange. After all, Hellion Vivian was his maid and they were already comrades on the same front. Naturally, she was concerned about him. She found a stove and boiled 2 bowls of ginger water. He planned to send it in. She never would have thought that she would run into Bailey Jiaju at the entrance of the hall. His appearance was still noble and indifferent. His steps were slow and graceful. He wore a crescent moon-colored robe. His shoulders were lined with clean and spotless fur. Shadow, who was holding an umbrella for him, followed behind him as he slowly walked towards Hellion Wei. He lowered his head and glanced at the porcelain bowl in her hand. His cold eyes turned even colder. "Your Highness, my young master is inside." The servant didn't know what happened. He led the way for Beligaju with a smile. Beligaju started walking again. He walked past Hellion Vivian and entered the hall. No one knew how tight his hands were under his long sleeves. Nangong Lai was still lying on the desk. When he saw Beligaju, he immediately began to complain. "Aju, what happened in the palace these 2 days? There are so many things. I'm so tired." Tired? Bailey Jiaju sat on the chaise lounge and leaned back. He reached out to loosen his fur collar and said, "I see that you're living quite comfortably. Going out of the palace, picking flowers, and now someone is making ginger water for you. In the past, it was a benefit that only he could get. Well, he knew that he was not special to her. What he didn't expect was that she could give the only warmth he had to anyone. It was ironic, wasn't it? How is it good? You did it on purpose, didn't you? You gave me so many things to do." Nangong Lai was not stupid. He just couldn't figure it out. "What did I do to offend you?" Beligaju turned his face and saw Hellion Vivian walk in. She said in a cold voice, "You think too much." "Well, even if I think too much, you can find more people to help you from tomorrow onwards. I don't care how much money the Ministry of Civil Affairs embezzled." Nangong Lai held the brush in his mouth and patted the letter in his hand. He wanted to hear how Aju was going to explain. However, Bailey Jiaju was very calm and indifferent. "The people below sent the wrong one. I've been busy for a long time. You told me that the people below sent the wrong things." Nangong Lai's mouth twitched. What else could it be if he didn't like him? But he didn't know why. When he met Beligaju's eyes, he felt like he had wronged his brother. His scalp went numb. Seeing Hellion Vivian walk in with the ginger soup, Nangong Lai changed the topic. Aju, you must be cold after walking all the way here. Here's the ginger soup, do you want to have a bowl? No. The young man's voice was still cold. He looked like he was thinking about something. Nangong Lai understood. You're right. You don't drink things with a weird taste. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. He doesn't drink it? No wonder he always frowned when she passed it to him when they were young. He didn't like it. She would keep the rest of the bowl for later. Hellion Vivian put the bowl aside. When she leaned over, she saw the letter that Nangong Lai wrote to Qing Zhan. She couldn't help but laugh. Nangong Lai looked back and quickly pressed the paper. Don't tell anyone. Don't worry, I won't. Hellion Vivian smiled and looked away. She said with a meaningful tone. The two of them seemed to have each other's little secret. They had a tacit understanding. As if he couldn't stand the smell of the ginger soup in the room, the young man sitting on the chaise lounge suddenly stood up. Chapter 6:17. In fact, he did not make a big noise. It was only because there was no sign that it was so sudden. Hellion Vivian looked in the direction of Beligaju with a puzzled expression and raised her eyebrows slightly. It smells so bad, how did you drink it? The young man did not look at her but said to Nangong Lai coldly. Nangong Lai's nose twitched. Is it that bad? Why do I think it tastes good? It's good to eat more ginger in winter. Is that so? The young man sneered and then left. Nangong Lai thought that he could not stand the smell of ginger, but he did not expect that the next morning, all the food in the holy worship palace had turned into ginger. Shadow stood beside him with a serious face and reported. His Highness said that since Master Lai thinks that ginger is good for you, then you should eat more. Nangong Lai was speechless. Wait. Say it clearly before you leave. Damn it, what else could it be if he did not like him? It was all ginger, how could he eat it? Wouldn't it be faster to poison him to death? Nangong Lai was about to break down. He finally could not help but push the things aside and bring Hellion Vivian to deliver the flowers. Has she come out? Nangong Lai was still very shy sometimes. Hellion Vivian glanced at him. Why are you in such a hurry? Qing Zhan has entered the palace, of course she has to report the news first. I know. Nangong Lai touched his chin. But I always feel that Aju has been acting weird these 2 days. Do you think he will say bad things about me in front of Qing Zhan? Hellion Vivian was absent-minded. I don't think so. Why would he say bad things about you in front of Qing Zhan? He is not that freak. That's true. Nangong Lai stomped his feet. He must have been overthinking. Aju had always been very slow when it came to relationships. He even kept a distance from the eldest daughter of the Hellion family. He should not have thought that he would fall for Qing Zhan. No, he did not fall for Qing Zhan. He just felt that this little girl was quite interesting. Yes, that's right, he just felt that she was interesting. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. What are you muttering about? Hurry up and get the roses ready. After all, Nangong Lai was a young master who understood the heart of a young girl. He snapped his fingers wickedly. A beautiful rose appeared in his hand. Hellion Vivian smiled. I really underestimated you. It was no wonder that he was such a troublemaker when he grew up. He had learned all the tricks to pick up girls at such a young age. I'm woken up by my own handsomeness every day. I'm also very vexed about this. Nangong Lai curved his thin lips as if he had thought of something. This one is for you. Hellion Vivian knew his character, so she didn't reject him. She lazily took it and said, What do you want to ask me again? It's nothing. Nangong Lai smiled evilly. It's nothing more than what happened between you and Aju. Even if he had to die, he had to understand that Aju had only started messing with him after this woman had arrived. Hellion Vivian opened her mouth. Just as she was about to speak, she felt that there was someone behind her. She felt a chill down her spine. She turned her head and met the young man's deep and bottomless eyes. When did he arrive? Why was there no sound at all? Nangong Lai also saw Beligaju, but his attention wasn't on him. Instead he looked at Qing Zhan. Thinking of his actions just now, he couldn't help but feel annoyed. This girl saw him giving flowers. Did she think that he was a playboy again? No, he had to explain. Qingzhan, continue what you didn't finish reporting just now. The young man retracted his gaze. His palms had already formed a crescent moon. He walked into the courtyard, exuding a cold aura, refusing to let anyone near him. Nangong Lai wanted to follow him, but he was stopped by the shadow guards. Get out of my way. Nangong Lai lowered his voice. Shadow lowered his eyes but didn't step back. Master Lai, His Highness has been in a bad mood recently. Please don't go. In a bad mood? Nangong Lai narrowed his eyes and smiled. Could it be that the young lady of the Hellion family went missing again? Shadow didn't speak but glanced at Hellion Vivian. In fact, His Highness had been in a bad mood these 2 days. Not to mention that he was always in a daze. Even when he was listening to news, he was absent-minded. Especially after coming back from the Holy Worship Palace last night, he sat in the study room and didn't sleep for the whole night. He just sat there quietly holding a fur cloak in his hand. No one knew what he was thinking. Shadow had only seen His Highness like this at that time. 8 years ago, His Highness was still young and sick. He looked for this woman like crazy. Even when he was lying in bed with a fever, he was begging her to stay. However, no clues about this woman could be found in the entire palace. Since then, His Highness had changed. There wasn't any anger in his eyes. At that time, when the eldest prince passed away, the emperor was unhappy, but he didn't punish the Murong family. Instead, he gave His Highness a lot of trouble. The empress threw His Highness into the woodshed for 3 days and 3 nights because of his disrespect to her. She didn't even give him a sip of water. He and Bai Lu begged everywhere, but they still couldn't see His Highness. Fortunately, the retired emperor came back in advance and scolded the empress and the emperor. But in less than a year there was a big fire in the palace. After the fire, His Highness had been shut in. Later, His Highness accidentally met the young lady of the Hellion family. He was no longer like before, showing hostility to everyone he met. Instead, he gave people a kind of jade-like elegance and maturity. It was as if nothing could stir up his emotions anymore. Unless the young lady couldn't be found. His Highness would only frown, but even so he was indifferent. Till now. His Highness seemed to be out of control again. His Highness. Qingzhan was never a talkative person, but after she reported for a long time, she saw that her master didn't seem to hear her, so she couldn't help but tilt her head. In fact, since he walked into the room, Beligaju had forgotten that there was such a person beside him. His mind kept replaying her look when Nangong Lai gave her the flowers. She looked very happy. He had never seen her smile like that. The corners of her mouth were slightly raised without any purpose, just because she was happy. His heart felt like it was filled with ice water. It was so cold that he didn't want to talk at all. He slowly let go of his hands. In the end, he couldn't help but punch the wall with his fist. There was a loud bang. Shadow rushed in immediately. Seeing the young man's right hand was stained with blood, he said to Qingzhan anxiously, "Hurry up and call the imperial doctor." "No need." The young man stood there, letting the blood drip from his fingers. "Qingzhan, I have something to tell you. That you're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.